Daniel Hart stared at the gleaming entrance of Etoile, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, and felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just any blind date going wrong. The woman walking toward him, the one his meddling brother had set him up with, was Elena Cross, his boss. No, not just his boss, the billionaire CEO of the entire company, the woman whose signature appeared on corporate memos he read with his morning coffee. The untouchable executive whose mere presence in the office made entire departments hold their breath. And now she was standing 3 feet away, her eyes widening with the same horrified recognition that was surely written across his face. Want to see how a single father's worst nightmare turned into something he never saw coming? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story reaches. Daniel Hart had exactly 17 reasons why he shouldn't be here, and every single one of them was written in crayon on the refrigerator door back home. 17 drawings from his 6-year-old daughter Maya, stick figures holding hands, wobbly hearts, lopsided houses with smoke curling from chimneys, each one a reminder that his life had no room for complications like dating, romance, or the kind of vulnerability that had nearly destroyed him 3 years ago. Yet here he stood, outside Etoile on a Friday evening in late September, watching well-dressed couples disappear through brass-framed doors into a world of soft lighting and expensive wine. The Chicago skyline glittered behind him, reflecting off the darkening waters of Lake Michigan, and somewhere in the distance, a street musician played saxophone notes that felt almost mocking in their romantic suggestion. "You need this," his brother Marcus had insisted 2 weeks ago, cornering him in the break room at work. "You're 32, Danny. You can't hide behind Maya forever. She deserves to see her dad actually living, not just surviving." Daniel had protested, of course. He'd listed all the very reasonable objections to blind dates in general, and this particular setup specifically. He had responsibilities. He had a mortgage. He had a daughter whose bedtime routine was sacred, whose school permission slips required signing, whose nightmares about monsters under the bed needed a father present to chase away. But Marcus had worn him down with the persistence of someone who genuinely believed he was helping, sweetening the deal with an offer to babysit Maya for the evening. "Just one dinner," Marcus had said. "If it's terrible, you never have to do it again. But my friend swears this woman is perfect for you. Professional, independent, good values. Just meet her. What's the worst that could happen?" Standing outside Etoile now, Daniel was beginning to formulate an answer to that question. He checked his phone. 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes until he was officially late. The reservation was under his name. Marcus had handled all the details, probably afraid Daniel would find a way to sabotage the whole thing if given too much information. All he knew was that her name was Elena. She was 30, and she worked in corporate management, whatever that meant. Daniel caught his reflection in the restaurant's polished windows and barely recognized himself. The charcoal suit was borrowed from Marcus, slightly too tight in the shoulders, and the tie felt like a noose. His dark hair, usually practical and forgettable, had been styled with some product Marcus had insisted would make him look more confident, less exhausted single dad. The effect was disconcerting. He looked like someone playing dress-up, a man pretending to be the kind of person who belonged in places like this. The truth was simpler and far less glamorous. Daniel Hart was a senior financial analyst at Cross Global Enterprises, one of the largest private equity firms in the Midwest. It was a good job, a stable job, the kind of position his younger self would have been proud to achieve. But it wasn't the life he'd imagined back when he was studying finance at Northwestern, back when he dreamed of changing the world through smart investments and ethical business practices. These days, he changed diapers and packed lunches and attended parent-teacher conferences. He worked his 45 hours a week, collected his paycheck, and went home to the small house in Andersonville where Maya's toys colonized every available surface and the walls were covered with her artwork. It was enough. It had to be enough. "Excuse me, are you going in?" Daniel startled, turning to find an older couple waiting patiently behind him. The woman wore pearls and a knowing smile, the kind that suggested she'd witnessed many nervous first dates outside these very doors. "Yes, sorry." Daniel pulled open the door, holding it for them before following into the restaurant's warm interior. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. Outside had been the familiar chaos of Chicago, traffic noise, cool autumn air, the ambient sound of a city that never quite settled. Inside Etoile was another world entirely. Crystal chandeliers cast soft golden light across white tablecloths. The murmur of conversation blended with classical music played so quietly it seemed to come from the air itself. Every surface gleamed. Every detail spoke of money, taste, and the kind of casual elegance that made Daniel acutely aware of his borrowed suit and scuffed shoes. A hostess materialized, blonde and polished in a black dress that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly car payment. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Hart. Daniel Hart. For 2 at 8. She consulted her tablet, then smiled. "Of course, Mr. Hart. Your table is ready. If you'll follow me." They wove through the dining room, passing tables where people who belonged in places like this conversed easily over wine that probably cost more per bottle than Daniel spent on groceries in a month. He recognized the look of old money on some faces, new money on others, and that particular brand of Chicago power, the lawyers, the executives, the people who shaped the city from boardrooms and private clubs. The hostess led him to a corner table with a view of the city lights, a location clearly chosen for romance and privacy. "Your server will be right with you. Can I start you with sparkling or still water?" "Still is fine, thank you." She departed with another professional smile, leaving Daniel alone to contemplate the menu and his life choices. The prices weren't listed, never a good sign. He pulled out his phone to check the time and found a text from Marcus. "You there yet?" "Don't overthink it, just be yourself." "She's gonna love you." Daniel typed back, "Being myself is exactly why this won't work. That's the problem." He set the phone face down on the table and tried to remember how this was supposed to go. He'd been on dates before, obviously. He had a daughter, after all. But that felt like another lifetime, back when he was a different person with different dreams. Back before Sarah had left him 6 months into Maya's life, unable to handle the reality of parenthood, the weight of responsibility, the way a baby's needs consumed everything else. The divorce had been quick and clean. Sarah had signed away her parental rights without much fight, choosing her freedom over the daughter she'd never wanted in the first place. Daniel had been left with full custody, a new baby, and the stunning realization that he was going to have to figure out how to be both mother and father to a child who deserved so much better than the broken family she'd been born into. 3 years had passed since then. 3 years of learning to braid hair from YouTube tutorials, of negotiating with a toddler who had opinions about everything, of existing in a constant state of exhaustion and fierce protective love. He dated casually a few times in those years, coffee meetings that went nowhere, dinner with a coworker that had been pleasant but empty. Nothing that made him want to risk letting someone into the carefully constructed world he'd built around Maya. "Excuse me, are you Daniel Hart?" The voice came from behind him, professional, controlled, with an edge he couldn't quite identify. Daniel turned in his seat, prepared to meet Elena, the corporate management professional, ready to endure one awkward dinner before returning to his real life. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. Elena Cross stood 3 feet away, and the world contracted to a single point of horrible recognition. She was taller than he'd realized from the few times he'd seen her in the office, maybe 5'8" in heels, with dark hair pulled back in a style that was both severe and elegant. Her dress was midnight blue, expensive and understated, the kind of thing that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. High cheekbones, sharp eyes, and a mouth currently frozen in an expression that mirrored exactly what Daniel was feeling. Shock, horror, the desperate wish for the floor to open up and swallow them both. Because Elena Cross wasn't just some woman from the corporate world, she was the Elena Cross, the youngest self-made billionaire in Chicago, the CEO of Cross Global Enterprises, the company that employed him, that signed his paychecks, that controlled his professional destiny. She was the woman whose rare appearances in the office were preceded by emails reminding everyone to maintain professional standards and ensure all reports are current. She was power incarnate, success personified, and so far above his pay grade that they might as well exist in different solar systems, and his idiot brother had set them up on a blind date. "Mr. Hart." Her voice was carefully neutral now, but he caught the tremor underneath, the same panic he felt coursing through his own veins. "Ms. Cross." He stood automatically, the gesture ingrained from years of professional conditioning. This is a mistake," she finished, her composure cracking just enough to show genuine emotion beneath. and that emotion looked a lot like anger. This is a mistake. The hostess reappeared, oblivious to the tension radiating between them. Can I get you started with something to drink, ma'am? Elena's jaw tightened. For a moment, Daniel thought she might simply turn and walk away, leaving him alone at a table he couldn't afford with a story he could never explain. But something stopped her, pride maybe, or the same stubborn determination that had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. White wine, she said curtly. Whatever you recommend. The hostess departed, and Elena remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides. Daniel could see her mind working, calculating, trying to find a way out of the situation that wouldn't create an even bigger disaster. Please, he said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from him. We should probably talk about this. Should we? Her eyes flashed. What exactly is there to discuss, Mr. Hart? The fact that someone thought it was appropriate to set up a company employee with the CEO. Or perhaps we should discuss the optics of this situation, the potential implications, I didn't know, Daniel interrupted, his own frustration breaking through. My brother set this up. All he told me was that your name was Elena and you worked in corporate management. If I'd had any idea, corporate management? Despite the situation, a bitter laugh escaped her. That's accurate, if misleading. My brother doesn't know where I work, Daniel explained, feeling the need to defend Marcus even as he mentally composed several choice words for him. I don't talk about it much. He just knew you were successful and single and thought we might... He trailed off, realizing how absurd it sounded. Elena finally sat, but her posture remained rigid, defensive. And who set this up from my end? Because I'm going to have some very pointed words with them. I have no idea. Like I said, Marcus handled everything. I just showed up. As did I. She accepted the wine glass from a server who'd materialized silently, taking a long drink before setting it down with careful precision. My assistant suggested I needed to reconnect with normal life outside the office. Apparently, she took that as license to arrange my personal affairs without consent. The irony of the word choice wasn't lost on either of them. Elena's mouth twitched in what might have been humor under different circumstances. Daniel picked up his water glass, buying time to think. This was a disaster on multiple levels. If anyone from the office saw them together like this, the gossip would be immediate and vicious. Never mind that it was accidental, never mind that neither of them wanted this. Perception was everything in corporate environments, and the perception of a senior analyst dating the CEO would destroy his credibility instantly. We should leave, Elena said, echoing his thoughts. Separately, obviously. You can wait 5 minutes after I go, tell them I was ill or had an emergency. No one needs to know this happened. It was the logical solution, the safe solution. Daniel should have agreed immediately, should have been relieved at the easy out. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way Elena's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass again, or the tension in her shoulders that spoke of exhaustion beneath the professional armor, or maybe it was just the stubborn part of him that had never been good at taking the easy way out. The part that had chosen to raise Maya alone rather than give her up, that worked full-time while volunteering on weekends, that refused to let life's complications turn him into someone who ran from difficult situations. Or, he heard himself say, we could stay. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Excuse me? Stay. Have dinner. It's already awkward, and running away now just makes it worse. Tomorrow at work, we'll both be thinking about this, wondering if the other person is thinking about this. Better to just get through it. One meal. We can call it a business dinner if that makes it easier. A business dinner, she repeated slowly, where I appeared in evening wear and you're clearly dressed for a date. That will certainly dispel any potential gossip. You were the one who said no one needs to know this happened, Daniel countered. And they won't, unless we make it obvious by acting guilty. We're two professionals who happened to run into each other at a restaurant. We decided to share a meal, that's all. He wasn't sure where this confidence was coming from. Under normal circumstances, he would never dream of challenging Elena Cross, of suggesting what the CEO of his company should do. But these weren't normal circumstances, and something about the situation had stripped away the usual power dynamics, leaving just two people caught in an absurd situation neither had wanted. Elena studied him across the table, her expression unreadable. "You're suggesting we have dinner together, you and I, after agreeing this was a mistake." "I'm suggesting we're already here. The reservation is made, and I promised my brother I'd give this evening a chance. I keep my promises, even when they're inconvenient." He met her gaze steadily. "But if you need to leave, I understand. I'll handle the awkwardness on Monday. I'm good at being invisible in the office. It's kind of my specialty." Something shifted in her expression at that last comment. A flicker of, what? Recognition? Curiosity? Before he could identify it, their server appeared again. A young man with the practiced enthusiasm of someone working for tips at an expensive restaurant. "Good evening. My name is James, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Have you had a chance to look at our menu, or would you like to hear about our specials?" Daniel looked at Elena. The decision was hers: stay and endure an uncomfortable evening, or leave and confirm that this accidental meeting was significant enough to run from. After a moment that stretched like elastic, Elena picked up her menu. "Tell us about the specials, please." Relief and dread hit Daniel simultaneously. They were doing this. They were actually doing this. James launched into descriptions of dishes with ingredients Daniel had never heard of, prepared in ways he could barely imagine. Elena listened with polite attention, asking intelligent questions about preparation methods and wine pairings. Daniel mostly nodded, acutely aware that he was operating several tax brackets above his comfort zone. When the server finally departed with their orders, Elena had chosen something with duck. Daniel had pointed at the least expensive steak option. Silence settled over their table like snow. "So," Elena said finally, her tone carefully neutral, "your brother, Marcus, he means well. Meaning well and doing well are very different things. Trust me, I'm aware." Daniel turned his water glass, watching condensation slide down the sides. "He's been pestering me about dating for months. I kept refusing, so he took matters into his own hands." "And you let him?" "I'm a single parent. My social life consists of playdates and parent-teacher conferences. When your brother offers to babysit and insists you need one evening of adult interaction, you eventually cave just to stop the nagging." Elena's expression softened slightly at the mention of parenting. "How old?" "Maya's 6, first grade, currently obsessed with dinosaurs and convinced she's going to be a paleontologist, who also plays professional soccer and lives in a castle made entirely of ice cream." The corner of Elena's mouth twitched. "Ambitious." "She gets it from her dad," Daniel said, then immediately regretted the casual familiarity. "Sorry, it's fine." Elena took another sip of wine. "We're having dinner. We might as well talk like human beings rather than employee and employer." "Is that what we're doing? Being human beings?" "We're certainly not being very good at being professional acquaintances who accidentally ended up at the same restaurant." It wasn't quite a joke, but it was close enough that Daniel felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Maybe this wouldn't be completely terrible. Maybe they could get through one meal, establish that they were both reasonable adults who could handle an awkward situation, and return to their separate lives with minimal damage. "So what about you?" he asked, then immediately wanted to take it back. What was he supposed to say? What's it like being a billionaire? How does it feel to control the professional destinies of thousands of people? I mean, what does your assistant think you need to reconnect with, specifically? Elena's laugh was short and sharp. "According to Jennifer, I need to remember what it's like to interact with people who aren't reporting quarterly earnings or requesting budget approvals. She thinks I've forgotten how to be a person outside the office." "Have you?" The question came out before Daniel could stop it. Too direct, too personal. He waited for Elena to shut down, to remind him of boundaries and professional distance. Instead, she considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I tried to be anything other than the CEO. It's easier that way, cleaner. When people know who you are, they treat you accordingly. There are no surprises, no disappointments, no wondering if someone likes you or just likes your resources." There was something raw in that admission, something that made Daniel see her differently. Not as the untouchable CEO, but as someone who'd built walls so high even she couldn't see over them anymore. "That sounds lonely," he said quietly. Elena's eyes met his, sharp and defensive. It sounds successful. There's a difference. Does there have to be? In my experience, yes. She set down her wine glass with careful precision. You don't build what I've built by prioritizing personal connections over professional advancement. You make choices. You sacrifice. You learn to be comfortable with solitude because the alternative, depending on people who will inevitably let you down, is worse. Daniel thought about his own life, about the choices he'd made after Sarah left. He'd built walls too, different from Elena's, but walls nonetheless. The difference was, his walls were supposed to protect Maya, not himself. Or at least, that's what he told himself in the quiet hours of the night when loneliness felt like another person living in his house. What about you? Elena asked, turning the conversation back on him. Your brother thinks you need to date. I'm assuming that means you haven't been. Not seriously. Coffee dates that went nowhere. A few dinners that felt more like job interviews than actual connections. After a while, it seemed easier to just not. I have Maya, I have my work, I have my weekends volunteering at the community center. It's enough. Is it? The question hung between them, simple and complicated at once. It has to be, Daniel said, echoing her earlier words. When you're responsible for another person's entire world, you don't get the luxury of risking stability for possibility. Practical. Necessary. Their food arrived, saving them from wherever that conversation had been heading. James arranged plates with the precision of someone presenting art rather than meals, describing each element with enthusiasm that bordered on poetry. Daniel's steak looked excellent and completely intimidating. Elena's duck was arranged in careful swoops of sauce that probably had a French name he couldn't pronounce. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that felt less awkward than it should have. Daniel found himself relaxing incrementally, his shoulders dropping from somewhere around his ears back to their normal position. The food was incredible. He could admit that even as he tried not to think about the cost per bite. You volunteer at a community center? Elena asked, breaking the silence. Daniel looked up, surprised. Yeah, Saturday afternoons I teach financial literacy classes to teenagers, basic budgeting, how to avoid predatory loans, understanding credit. Nothing glamorous, but it matters, Elena finished. Teaching people how to protect themselves from systems designed to exploit them. Exactly. Daniel leaned forward slightly, warming to the subject. So many of these kids come from families where no one taught them about money management. They're one payday loan away from a debt cycle that could follow them for decades. If I can help even a few of them avoid that trap, it's worth giving up a few hours every weekend. Elena was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Which community center? Northside Hope. It's in Rogers Park, serves a lot of immigrant families and kids whose parents are working multiple jobs. They run after-school programs, job training, ESL classes, good people doing hard work with limited resources. I know Northside Hope, Elena said quietly. Daniel blinked. You do? I know all the major community organizations in Chicago. It's part of my work. She paused, her fingers tracing the stem of her wine glass. Cross Global Enterprises has a philanthropic division. We fund various programs focused on education and economic mobility. Right, I remember seeing something about that in the annual report. Daniel had read it while eating lunch at his desk, another dry corporate document about tax-deductible charity and good PR. What you probably didn't see in the annual report, Elena continued, her voice taking on a different quality, is that I personally oversee which programs get funded. I review applications myself, visit facilities, meet with directors. I funded Northside Hope's expansion last year, the new computer lab and the additional classroom space. Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. You funded... Wait, that was from Cross Global? Anonymously. I prefer it that way. It keeps the focus on the work rather than the donor. Elena's expression softened into something almost vulnerable. I grew up not far from Rogers Park. Different circumstances, different decade, but the same kind of neighborhood where people work 3 jobs and still can't get ahead. Programs like Northside Hope saved me in a lot of ways. Gave me a place to go after school where someone noticed I was bright and hungry and determined. helped me see that there was a path out beyond the one everyone expected me to take. This was not the conversation Daniel had expected to have tonight. Not with Elena Cross, the billionaire CEO who existed mainly as a name on corporate communications and a force that moved through the office like distant weather. "I didn't know that," he said. "About your background, I mean. The business profiles always make it sound like you emerged fully formed from Harvard Business School, ready to conquer the world." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Business profiles are fiction written by people who need a simple narrative. Self-made billionaire sounds better than daughter of an absent father and a mother who cleaned houses 16 hours a day to keep us fed. It's cleaner, more inspiring, less complicated by reality." "Reality is always more complicated," Daniel agreed. "Also usually more interesting." "Is it?" Elena challenged. "Or does it just make people uncomfortable when success stories don't fit the comfortable template?" "Both can be true." They fell into silence again, but it felt different now. Less awkward strangers forced into proximity, more like two people discovering unexpected common ground in the middle of neutral territory. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said finally. "And you can absolutely tell me it's none of my business. I'll reserve the right to refuse to answer. But yes, ask. If you fund programs like Northside Hope, if you came from the kind of background that makes you care about economic mobility and protecting vulnerable people, how do you reconcile that with running a private equity firm? No offense, but that's not exactly an industry known for its humanitarian concerns." Elena's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something sharper and more complicated. "You think there's a contradiction there?" "I think there's a tension," Daniel said carefully. "Private equity makes money by buying companies, restructuring them, usually by cutting costs, which often means cutting people, and selling them for profit. That's the opposite of protecting vulnerable workers." "That's the stereotype," Elena corrected. "And yes, there are plenty of firms that operate exactly that way. Strip assets, slash payroll, extract maximum value regardless of human cost. But that's not the only model." She set down her fork, her full attention now on him in a way that made Daniel acutely aware of the intelligence behind those sharp eyes. "Cross Global operates differently," she continued. "We target companies that are failing because of poor management, not lack of potential. We invest in infrastructure, in training, in creating sustainable business models that actually value human capital. Yes, sometimes that means difficult decisions and restructuring, but our average retention rate post-acquisition is 87%, and our acquired companies show an average wage increase of 15% within 2 years. We make money by making companies stronger, not by bleeding them dry." Daniel struggled to process this. "That's not what I expected." "Most people don't expect billionaires to have ethics," Elena said dryly. "It's easier to assume we're all cartoon villains counting money in towers while the world burns." "I didn't mean, Yes, you did, and it's fine. You're not wrong to be skeptical. There are plenty of people in my position who've earned that skepticism." She picked up her wine glass, studying the amber liquid. "But I didn't claw my way out of poverty just to become the kind of person who keeps other people trapped in it. If I'm going to have power, I'm going to use it for something beyond just accumulating more power." Daniel found himself leaning forward, drawn in despite himself. "Is that why you got into private equity? To reform it from the inside?" "That's part of it. The other part is that I'm good at it. Seeing potential where others see failure, understanding systems and how to fix them, making hard decisions that serve the long term rather than the immediate profit. And yes, I make a lot of money doing it. I won't apologize for that. Money is freedom, security, the ability to fund programs like Northside Hope without asking anyone's permission. Money is power, and power used well can actually change things." "That's a refreshingly honest take," Daniel said. "Most people in your position would dress it up in more palatable language." "Most people in my position would have walked out of this restaurant the moment they saw you sitting here," Elena countered. "I'm already operating outside normal parameters tonight. Might as well be honest about it." Their server reappeared to clear their plates and offer dessert menus. Elena declined. Daniel followed her lead, though the descriptions of chocolate soufflé and crème brûlée had made his mouth water. When James departed again, they were left with coffee and the growing awareness that this strange evening was approaching its end. "I should be clear about something," Elena said. her voice returning to the controlled professionalism that had characterized her entrance. This doesn't change anything at work. Monday morning, we go back to our respective roles. You're an analyst. I'm the CEO. This conversation never happened. Of course, Daniel agreed quickly. Too quickly, maybe, like he was grateful for the reminder of boundaries and hierarchies. But Elena was still talking, her words careful and measured. That said, I want you to know that nothing you said tonight will impact your position at Cross Global. You questioned my ethics, you challenged my industry, you spoke to me like... She paused, searching for the right word. Like a person. That took courage, or maybe just foolishness, but either way it won't be held against you. I appreciate that, Miss Cross. Elena, she corrected. At least for the next 5 minutes, until we leave this restaurant and return to reality. Elena, Daniel repeated, testing the name outside the formal context of corporate hierarchy. It felt strange on his tongue, intimate in a way that made him aware of how far they'd strayed from the expected script of this evening. You surprised me tonight, Daniel. Elena's expression had softened in the candlelight, showing traces of the person beneath the CEO armor. When Jennifer told me I was having dinner with a financial analyst, I expected someone either intimidated into silence or trying to network their way into better opportunities. I didn't expect someone who would challenge me, who shares my history of community programs, who actually seems to care about the same things I do beyond just the optics. I could say the same, Daniel admitted. Well, honestly, I'm not sure what I expected from Elena Cross, the billionaire CEO, but it wasn't this. It wasn't someone who actually seems to understand what it's like to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Who knows why programs like Northside Hope matter? They looked at each other across the table, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or the acknowledgement of possibility where none should exist. It was complicated by their professional relationship, by the vast gulf in their resources and power, by all the logical reasons this accidental dinner should remain exactly that, an accident quickly forgotten, never to be repeated. We should probably go, Elena said, but she didn't move. Probably, Daniel agreed, equally still. The moment stretched, fragile and strange, until James returned with the check. Elena reached for it immediately, and Daniel didn't fight her. They both knew who could afford this meal, and it wasn't the senior analyst sitting on the wrong side of the table. Outside the restaurant, Chicago's autumn night had turned cooler. Elena's car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Daniel's house, was already waiting at the curb, summoned by some invisible signal to her driver. She paused before getting in, turning back to Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. This was... She trailed off, seeming to struggle with how to categorize the evening. Unexpected, Daniel finished. Yes, unexpected. She extended her hand, formal and professional. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Hart. He shook it, feeling the contrast between this moment and the conversation they'd just shared. Thank you, Miss Cross. She slid into the back seat, and the car pulled away, leaving Daniel alone on the sidewalk with the taste of excellent steak and the unsettling awareness that something had shifted tonight. Some understanding had been reached that neither of them had planned for or particularly wanted. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How did it go? Daniel stared at the message, trying to formulate an answer that captured the surreal reality of the past 2 hours. How did you explain that you'd accidentally had dinner with your billionaire CEO, that you'd challenged her business ethics and heard about her childhood, that you'd found unexpected common ground in community programs and complicated histories? It was fine, he typed back finally. We're not compatible. Don't set me up again. The response was immediate. Come on, it can't have been that bad. Give it a chance. Marcus, please, no more blind dates. I mean it. He pocketed his phone and started the walk to the L station, pulling his borrowed jacket tighter against the wind coming off the lake. Somewhere above him, in luxury apartments or penthouse offices, Elena Cross was returning to whatever world billionaire CEOs inhabited. And tomorrow, he'd wake up to Maya's demands for pancakes and her questions about dinosaurs, to the familiar routine of a life built around responsibility and routine. The blind date was over. The mistake was complete. Everything would return to normal, Except Daniel couldn't shake the memory of Elena's eyes across the table when she'd talked about using power for something beyond accumulating more power. Couldn't forget the way she'd listened when he talked about his volunteer work, like it mattered, like he mattered beyond his role as employee number however many thousand in her corporate empire. It didn't mean anything, he told himself, as the L train rattled north toward home. It couldn't mean anything. Elena Cross existed in a different stratosphere, and even if she'd briefly descended to share dinner and conversation, gravity would inevitably pull her back up to where she belonged. Monday would come. They would return to their separate orbits. This strange evening would fade into the category of amusing stories, the kind of coincidence you mention at parties years later with self-deprecating humor and careful distance. But as the train carried him home through the city lights, Daniel found himself thinking about possibility, the dangerous, complicated kind that had no place in his carefully controlled life, the kind that could disrupt everything he'd built, every wall he'd constructed, every reason he'd given himself for staying safely invisible. The blind date he'd tried to escape had ended exactly as it should, with both parties returning to their separate lives, the mistake acknowledged and corrected. So why did it feel like something had only just begun? Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of gravity. Daniel dropped Maya off at school, endured her enthusiastic description of the castle she was building in her imagination, now featuring a moat filled with chocolate milk instead of water, and made it to the Cross Global offices by 8:15. The building rose 43 stories above Chicago's financial district, all glass and steel, and the kind of architectural ambition that announced its importance to anyone within viewing distance. He badged through security with a nod to Robert, the guard who'd been there longer than Daniel had worked at the company, and rode the elevator to the 27th floor, where the financial analysis department occupied a maze of cubicles and conference rooms. His desk sat in the middle of the floor, deliberately unremarkable, surrounded by colleagues who barely noticed his arrival. Perfect. Invisible. Exactly how he preferred it. Hart! There you are. Marcus materialized before Daniel had even set down his coffee, wearing the eager expression of someone about to demand details about something Daniel absolutely did not want to discuss. So? Come on, don't leave me hanging. How was Friday night? Daniel logged into his computer, buying time. Around them, the office hummed with Monday morning energy. Conversations about weekend activities, the hiss of the coffee machine, keyboards clicking to life. Normal. Everything was completely normal. It was fine, he said, keeping his voice neutral. Fine? That's all I get? I arranged the perfect setup, get you out of the house for the first time in months, and all you can say is fine. Marcus, I told you Saturday. We're not compatible. It didn't work out. Can we please drop it? His brother leaned against the cubicle wall, studying him with the annoying perception of someone who'd known him for 32 years. You're being weird about this. What happened? Was she not what you expected? She was exactly what I didn't expect, Daniel muttered, then immediately regretted it when Marcus's eyes lit up with interest. What does that mean? Did you like her? Did she like you? Are you going to see her again? No to all of the above. Now please, I have work to do. But, Marcus, Daniel turned to face his brother directly, lowering his voice. I appreciate what you were trying to do. I know you want me to be happy, but the blind date thing isn't going to work for me. Can we please just let it go? Something in his tone must have finally penetrated because Marcus raised his hands in surrender. Okay, I'm dropping it. But for the record, I think you're making a mistake giving up so easily. Elena sounded perfect for you on paper. Daniel's fingers froze over his keyboard. What did you just say? Elena, your date. Jennifer, my buddy's wife who set you guys up. She said Elena was brilliant, successful, passionate about giving back to the community. She thought you'd have a lot in common. Marcus checked his watch. Look, I've got a meeting in 5. We'll talk later, yeah? He disappeared before Daniel could respond, leaving behind a wake of cologne and the stunning revelation that Marcus's buddy was apparently married to Jennifer, Elena's assistant. The woman who'd suggested Elena needed to reconnect with normal life outside the office. Daniel stared at his computer screen without seeing it, his mind racing through implications. Jennifer had set up Elena. Marcus had set up Daniel. Neither of them had known about the professional connection because Daniel had never mentioned where he worked to Marcus's friend, And presumably, Jennifer hadn't shared details about Elena's personal life with her husband. A perfect storm of good intentions and terrible timing. He forced himself to focus on the spreadsheet in front of him, quarterly projections that needed review before the Wednesday department meeting. Numbers were safe, predictable, free from the complicated messiness of accidental dinners with billionaire CEOs. He lost himself in formulas and forecasts, in the orderly world where everything added up correctly if you just applied the right calculations. By lunchtime, he'd almost convinced himself that Friday night had been an aberration, a strange blip that would fade into irrelevance. Then his desk phone rang with an internal extension he didn't recognize. "Daniel Hart," he answered, still half-focused on his screen. "Mr. Hart, this is Jennifer Michaels from the executive floor. Miss Cross would like to see you in her office at 2 o'clock this afternoon." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, what?" "Ms. Cross has requested a meeting with you at 2 p.m. Is that time acceptable?" Nothing about this was acceptable. Elena had said nothing would change at work, that Friday night would remain separate from their professional lives. A summons to the CEO's office 3 days later was the opposite of nothing changing. Yes, of course, he heard himself say, because what else could he say? You didn't refuse meetings with the CEO, especially not when you'd recently had dinner with her and discussed everything from childhood poverty to business ethics. "Excellent. I'll have someone escort you up at 1:55. The line went dead. Daniel set the phone down carefully, fighting the urge to put his head on his desk and quietly panic. Around him, the office continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the fact that his world had just tilted sideways. "You okay, man?" Josh from the next cubicle poked his head over the divider. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just got called to a meeting on the executive floor," Daniel said, which was true if incomplete. Josh whistled. "Damn. What did you do to get executive attention? That's either really good or really bad. No middle ground up there." "I have no idea," Daniel said honestly. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel tried to work, managed to respond to emails without major errors, and mostly succeeded in not catastrophizing about what Elena might want to discuss. Maybe it was routine, some kind of random employee check-in that had nothing to do with Friday night. Maybe she'd forgotten he even worked here, and this was pure coincidence. Neither explanation was remotely convincing. At 1:55, an assistant Daniel had never met appeared at his desk with a polite smile and a laminated visitor badge. "Mr. Hart? If you'll follow me, please." The executive floor occupied the building's top level, accessible only by a private elevator that required special clearance. Daniel had never been above the 35th floor, where the occasional all-hands meetings took place in the large conference center. The 43rd floor was reserved for C-suite executives, their immediate staff, and apparently terrified analysts who'd accidentally had dinner with the CEO. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked nothing like the cubicle maze below. Here, everything was elegant minimalism, cream walls, hardwood floors, furniture that probably cost more than Daniel's car. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Chicago, the city spreading out in all directions like a promise or a warning. Jennifer stood from behind a desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier. She was younger than Daniel had expected, maybe 40, with the kind of professional polish that came from years of managing powerful people's lives. Her expression gave nothing away as she greeted him. "Mr. Hart, thank you for coming up. Miss, Cross is finishing a call but should be available shortly. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you." She gestured to a seating area with leather chairs that probably cost more than his monthly salary. Daniel sat, acutely aware of every detail. The abstract art on the walls, the fresh flowers on Jennifer's desk, the quiet efficiency of the space. This was a different world from the one he inhabited 27 floors below, and he felt the distance keenly. The door to Elena's office opened, and she emerged looking nothing like the woman from Friday night. Gone was the midnight blue dress, replaced by a charcoal pantsuit that was all business and authority. Her hair was pulled back severely, and her expression was the practiced neutrality of someone who'd perfected the art of revealing nothing. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in." Daniel followed her into an office that matched the reception area's aesthetic, elegant, minimal, expensive. The wall behind her desk was floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling below like a game board. Her desk was surprisingly clear of clutter, just a laptop, a single file folder, and a framed photograph angled away from his view. "Please, sit." Elena gestured to one of two chairs facing her desk, then closed the door behind them with a soft click that felt ominous. Daniel sat, trying to ignore the way his heart hammered against his ribs. This was fine. This was just a meeting. CEOs met with analysts all the time, probably. Maybe not all the time. Maybe almost never. But still. Elena moved behind her desk, but didn't sit immediately. Instead, she stood by the window, silhouetted against the city light, and Daniel was struck by how different she seemed from the woman who'd talked about childhood poverty and community programs over duck and wine. Here, in her element, she was every inch the billionaire CEO, powerful, controlled, untouchable. "I want to address Friday night," she said finally, turning to face him, directly and clearly, so there's no ambiguity moving forward. "Of course." Daniel's mouth felt dry. What happened was an accident, a well-intentioned mistake by people who didn't have the full picture. Agreed? Agreed. "It can't happen again," Elena continued. The optics of a CEO having any kind of personal relationship with an employee, even an accidental one, are complicated at best, potentially disastrous at worst. I need to be very clear that Friday night was an isolated incident with no bearing on your employment or professional standing here. "I understand completely," Daniel said, meaning it. "I never expected otherwise." Good. Some of the tension eased from Elena's shoulders, though her expression remained guarded. "That said, I also wanted to tell you directly that I appreciated our conversation. You treated me like a person rather than a title, and that's rare. I didn't want you walking away from Friday thinking I didn't value that." Daniel blinked, surprised by the admission. "I valued it too," he said carefully. "The conversation, I mean. It wasn't what I expected, but in retrospect it was better than what I thought I was signing up for." The corner of Elena's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Your brother has terrible timing. He means well. So does Jennifer." Elena finally sat, her posture relaxing incrementally. "She's been trying to convince me I need more balance in my life, more connection to the world outside quarterly reports and board meetings. I think Friday was her attempt at intervention. Marcus said something similar, that I needed adult interaction beyond parent-teacher conferences. And instead, we both got corporate awkwardness and uncomfortable revelations about how small Chicago's professional world actually is." It could have been worse," Daniel offered. "How?" "I don't know. We could have been caught by someone from the office. Or the food could have been terrible. Or I could have spilled wine all over that very expensive dress." Elena's expression softened into something almost amused. "Setting the bar very low for could have been worse, Mr. Hart." "Daniel," he said before he could stop himself, "if we're talking about Friday night, I mean, using Mr. Hart makes it seem more formal than it actually was." She studied him for a long moment, and Daniel couldn't tell if he'd just made a mistake or not. Then she nodded slowly. "Daniel, then. But only in this office, and only when we're discussing the personal rather than professional." "That seems fair." Silence settled between them, not quite comfortable, but not entirely awkward either. Daniel found himself noticing details he'd missed on Friday. The way Elena's eyes were more gray than brown in the office lighting, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her fingers drummed once against the desk before stilling, like she'd caught herself in an unconscious habit. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said suddenly, "and you can refuse to answer if it's too personal." "You're the CEO. You can ask me anything you want." "That's not the same as you feeling comfortable answering," she pointed out. "I'm asking as the person who had dinner with you Friday, not as your employer." Daniel nodded, curious despite himself. "Ask." "Your daughter's mother. You mentioned being a single parent, but you didn't mention whether she's still in the picture. Is that a painful subject?" It was a painful subject, but not in the way most people assumed. Daniel considered how much to share, what was appropriate for this strange conversation that existed in the liminal space between personal and professional. Sarah left when Maya was 6 months old, he said finally. The divorce was quick. She signed away custody without much fight. Motherhood wasn't what she wanted, and she was honest enough to admit it rather than stay and be miserable. I respect her for that, actually. Better to leave cleanly than stay and resent a child who didn't ask to be born. Elena's expression shifted, something like understanding or sympathy softening her features. That must have been difficult. Raising a child alone while building a career? It was necessary, Daniel said simply. Maya needed a parent who was present, who chose her every day. I couldn't be that person and also be the kind of ambitious professional I thought I wanted to be. So I made a choice. Stable job, consistent hours, enough money to keep us comfortable, but not enough to require sacrificing all my time. It's not the career I imagined when I was getting my MBA, but it's the one that lets me be the father Maya deserves. You gave up your ambitions for her? I redirected them, Daniel corrected. My ambition now is to raise a good human being, to teach her that she's valued and loved, to give her the stability I had, and Sarah didn't. That's worth more than any executive position. Elena was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. She was never home. I raised myself essentially with help from community programs and neighbors who took pity on the latchkey kid. I didn't understand then that she was doing the best she could, that her absence was the price of our survival. I just knew I was alone. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. Daniel understood instinctively that this wasn't something Elena shared often, maybe not ever in professional contexts. Is that why you fund programs like Northside Hope? He asked gently. Because you remember being that kid? Partly. Also because I have the resources to ensure other kids don't have to be as alone as I was. She met his eyes directly. Money doesn't fix systemic poverty, but it can create spaces where kids have support, education, opportunity. It can be the difference between a child giving up or finding a path forward. That's what I'm trying to do with the financial literacy classes, Daniel said. Give them tools their parents might not have, information that could save them from predatory systems designed to trap people in debt. You teach them to protect themselves. As best I can, it's not much, but it's everything to the kids who hear it, Elena interrupted. Don't diminish what you're doing. Education is power, especially for people who've been told they don't deserve access to it. They looked at each other across the expanse of her desk, and Daniel felt again that strange sense of connection from Friday night. 2 people from different worlds finding unexpected common ground in shared values and parallel scars. This is exactly what we're not supposed to be doing, Elena said quietly. What? Connecting, finding things in common, treating this as anything other than a clear professional boundary conversation. Right. Daniel sat back, creating physical distance to match the emotional retreat. You're right. I should go. I'm sure you have actual important meetings to get to. Daniel, wait. Elena stood as he did, moving around the desk with quick decision. I need to be honest about something, and I need you to hear it clearly. He stopped, turning to face her. They were closer now, close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way she was fighting some internal battle he couldn't name. Friday night scared me, she said, her voice low and intense. Not because it was awkward or inconvenient, but because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking to you, being challenged by you, discovering we care about the same things, and that's dangerous for both of us. Because of the professional relationship, Daniel said, because of everything, the power imbalance, the potential for gossip and scandal, the impossibility of separating personal feelings from professional dynamics. She held his gaze steadily. I didn't build what I've built by making impulsive decisions based on attraction or connection. I can't afford that luxury, and neither can you. Your career could be destroyed by association with me. People would assume favoritism, inappropriate influence, all the ugly speculation that comes with any relationship that crosses hierarchical boundaries. I understand, Daniel said, even as some part of him wanted to argue, to point out that they were both adults capable of managing complicated situations. But she was right. The risks were real, the potential for damage enormous. Do you? Elena stepped closer, and Daniel caught the faint scent of her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that probably had a French name. Because part of me wants to ignore all the very sensible reasons we should never speak again outside of absolute professional necessity. Part of me wants to suggest we get coffee, continue the conversations we started Friday, explore whatever this unexpected connection might become. And that part of me is terrifyingly strong given that we've had exactly one dinner and one meeting. Daniel's heart was doing complicated things in his chest, gymnastics that had no place in a CEO's office on a Monday afternoon. What's the other part of you saying? The other part is reminding me that I have responsibilities, a company to run, shareholders to answer to, and a reputation built on professionalism and clear boundaries. That part is telling me to send you back to your desk and ensure we interact only through proper channels going forward. She paused, her expression almost helpless. That part usually wins. That part is how I got here. But not this time. This time I'm standing here telling you things I shouldn't, admitting attraction I should deny, and generally behaving like someone who's forgotten how to protect herself from complications. Elena's laugh was short and self-deprecating. You're dangerous, Daniel Hart. You make me want to be reckless. The admission sent warmth flooding through Daniel's chest, dangerous and intoxicating. He should step back, should agree that this was impossible, should take the escape route she was offering and return to his safe, controlled life 27 floors below. Instead, he heard himself say, what if we were careful? What if we found a way to explore this without risking either of our professional positions? Elena's eyes widened slightly. You're suggesting we secretly date? That's your solution? I'm suggesting that walking away from something that might matter because it's complicated feels like cowardice. We're both intelligent adults. Surely we can figure out a way to navigate this without it becoming a corporate scandal. And if we can't? If someone finds out, if gossip starts, if your career gets damaged because people assume I'm showing favoritism? Then we'll deal with it, Daniel said, with more confidence than he felt. But deciding it's impossible before we even try seems like letting fear make our choices for us. Elena stared at him, and he watched her mind work through possibilities and consequences, calculating risks the way she probably calculated everything in her life. Finally, she shook her head slowly, but her expression wasn't entirely negative. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Daniel admitted, but I'm also a single father who hasn't felt genuinely interested in anyone in 3 years, who spent Friday night actually enjoying a conversation instead of counting minutes until I could leave. That's worth something, isn't it? It's worth a great deal, Elena said softly. Which is exactly why it's so dangerous. She moved back to her desk, creating distance that felt both necessary and regrettable. When she spoke again, her voice had regained some of its professional control, though her eyes remained conflicted. I need time to think about this, to consider the implications, the risks, whether I'm willing to take the chance on something that could complicate both our lives enormously. That's fair, Daniel said, though disappointment settled in his stomach like lead. In the meantime, we maintained complete professionalism at work. No personal conversations, no interactions beyond what's necessary for business purposes. Agreed? Agreed. And you should know, if I decide this is too risky, if I determine that the responsible choice is to maintain clear boundaries, I need you to respect that decision without resentment or bitterness. I will, Daniel promised. But Elena, if you decide to take the risk, if you think there's a way to make this work, I need you to know I'm serious. I'm not looking for some casual thing or an exciting secret. I'm a single father with limited time and energy. I wouldn't be suggesting this if I didn't think it might be worth the complication. Something shifted in Elena's expression, surprise maybe, or the recognition that he was offering something real in exchange for the risks. She nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind. Now, you should probably get back to your floor before Jennifer starts wondering why this meeting is running long. Daniel moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Thank you for being honest with me. About Friday, about this, about all of it. Thank you for not running away when you saw me at the restaurant, Elena said. Most people would have. I'm starting to realize I'm not most people. No, she agreed quietly. You're really not. The elevator ride back down felt surreal, like he was descending from another world back into ordinary reality. Josh looked up when Daniel returned to his desk, eyebrows raised in question. "So, how'd it go with the big boss?" "Fine," Daniel said, logging back into his computer. "Just routine check-in stuff." "Routine check-in on the 43rd floor? Man, you're either being groomed for something big or you're in trouble you're not telling me about." If only Josh knew how accurate and complicated that assessment was. Daniel managed a non-committal shrug and buried himself in work, trying to ignore the way his phone felt heavy in his pocket, like it might ring any moment with Elena's decision. The rest of the week passed in careful professional distance. Daniel saw Elena exactly once, a glimpse of her walking through the lobby, surrounded by executives, moving with the purposeful efficiency of someone whose time was measured in millions. She didn't look his way, didn't acknowledge his existence, and Daniel told himself it was what they'd agreed to, what was necessary and proper. It still felt like rejection. By Friday afternoon, he'd almost convinced himself that Elena had made her decision through silence, that the lack of contact was her answer to his suggestion of exploring whatever connection existed between them. He picked up Maya from school, listened to her excited description of the science experiment involving vinegar and baking soda, and tried to focus on the real parts of his life instead of the impossible fantasy of dating a billionaire CEO. His phone buzzed while he was making dinner, Maya's chatter filling the kitchen as she built an elaborate castle from wooden blocks on the floor. Daniel glanced at the screen, expecting Marcus or a reminder about some weekend obligation. Instead, he found a text from an unknown number. "This is Elena. I got your number from HR files. Professional privilege, technically an abuse of power, definitely not appropriate. But I needed to tell you something that couldn't wait until Monday." Daniel's heart launched into his throat. He set down the spatula carefully, checking that Maya was still absorbed in her construction project. "I'm listening," he typed back. The response came quickly. "I've thought about what you said, about being careful, about finding a way to explore this without risking everything. I've run scenarios, calculated risks, considered every possible complication. And I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of letting fear make all my decisions, tired of being so careful that I forget how to actually live." Daniel read the message twice, trying to make sure he wasn't misinterpreting the meaning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying let's try. Carefully, secretly, with clear boundaries and constant communication about whether this is working or causing more problems than it's worth." "You're serious?" "I wouldn't joke about something this significant. Are you still interested, or have you come to your senses this week?" Daniel looked at Maya, at the life he'd built that was safe and predictable and exactly what she needed. Adding Elena to that equation was risky, complicated, potentially disastrous if things went wrong. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to decline politely, to stick with what he knew, to protect his daughter from any potential instability. But he remembered Elena's eyes across the dinner table when she'd talked about using power for something beyond accumulating more power. Remembered the way she'd actually listened when he talked about his volunteer work, like it mattered, like he mattered. Remembered feeling genuinely interested in another person for the first time since Sarah had left. "I'm interested," he typed. "When can I see you again? Tomorrow evening?" "I have an event earlier, charity gala, unavoidable. But I could meet you after, somewhere private, nowhere we'd be recognized together. I'll need to arrange childcare." "Of course. Let me know if that's possible." "And Daniel? This is just dinner, a conversation. We're not deciding anything beyond whether there's enough here to warrant a second date." "Understood. I'll let you know about tomorrow." He set his phone down and stared at the simmering pasta sauce, his mind racing through logistics. Marcus could watch Maya. He'd done it last week, and convincing him it was another blind date wouldn't be difficult. The real question was whether Daniel was actually ready to do this, to step off the safe path he'd been walking for 3 years into territory that was exciting and terrifying in equal measure. "Daddy, look!" Maya held up her block castle, beaming with pride. "It's even better than before. Now it has a tower for the princess who's actually a scientist and also knows karate." Daniel laughed, crouching down to admire her creation. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Tell me about this scientist princess." As Maya launched into an elaborate backstory involving dinosaurs, experiments, and a dragon who was actually just misunderstood, Daniel felt certainty settle in his chest. Yes, dating Elena was risky. Yes, it could complicate everything. But his daughter deserved a father who knew how to embrace possibility, who understood that sometimes the best things in life required courage. He texted Marcus while Maya wasn't looking, arranging babysitting with the same story about another setup, ignoring his brother's enthusiastic response about persistence paying off. Then he sent a message to Elena. Childcare arranged. Where and when? Her response came after a few minutes. I'll send you an address tomorrow afternoon. Casual dress, we're keeping this low-key. Looking forward to it. So am I. Which is either the best decision I've made in years or the beginning of a spectacular disaster. Why not both? Daniel typed. Why not both? Elena agreed. And just like that, the blind date he'd tried to escape had transformed into something neither of them had planned for. A second chance, a conscious choice, a leap into uncertainty that felt simultaneously reckless and exactly right. Daniel returned to making dinner, to Maya's stories about scientist princesses and misunderstood dragons, to the familiar rhythms of his carefully constructed life. But underneath it all, anticipation hummed like electricity. The promise of tomorrow evening when he'd see Elena again. Not as CEO and employee, but as two people exploring whatever impossible thing was growing between them. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. The address Elena sent Saturday afternoon led Daniel to a part of Chicago he'd never had reason to visit. A quiet neighborhood in Lincoln Park, where old brownstones sat behind wrought iron gates and money whispered rather than shouted. The building itself was unassuming from the street, just another renovated historic structure that could house anything from luxury condos to professional offices. Daniel checked the address 3 times before pressing the buzzer for Unit 4B, acutely aware that he was wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt to meet a billionaire. Elena had said casual, but he suspected her definition of casual and his occupied different tax brackets. Come up. Elena's voice crackled through the intercom, and the door buzzed open. The interior hallway was tastefully restored, original woodwork, modern lighting, the kind of careful renovation that preserved character while adding luxury. Daniel climbed to the 4th floor, his footsteps echoing on marble stairs, and found Elena waiting in an open doorway at the end of the hall. She'd meant it about casual. Gone was the severe business suit, replaced by dark jeans and a cream sweater that made her look younger, softer, more approachable. Her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders, and her face was free of the sharp professional makeup she wore to the office. She looked beautiful and real and slightly nervous, which somehow made Daniel feel better about his own jangling nerves. You found it okay? She asked, stepping back to let him enter. GPS is a wonderful invention. Daniel followed her into what turned out to be a spacious loft apartment with exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small park. The space was elegantly furnished but lived in, with books stacked on end tables and a laptop abandoned on the coffee table. This is beautiful. It's my escape, Elena said, moving to the kitchen area where wine glasses already sat waiting. No one from the office knows about this place. I keep a penthouse downtown for appearances, business entertaining, the image people expect. But this is where I actually live when I need to remember I'm human. Smart separation, Daniel observed, accepting the glass of red wine she offered. Clark Kent had his apartment. Superman had the Fortress of Solitude. Elena laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. Are you calling me Superman? More like pointing out that everyone needs a place where they can take off the cape and just exist. I like that. She gestured to the living area, and they settled onto a comfortable couch that faced the windows. Outside, evening light painted the park in shades of gold and amber. How was your daughter's day? Maya, right? Amazing, according to her. We went to the Museum of Science and Industry this morning. She wanted to see the dinosaur exhibit for the 100th time. Then she convinced me that ice cream was an acceptable lunch if she also ate some apple slices. Daniel smiled at the memory. She's currently at my brother's house explaining to him why his apartment needs more dinosaur decorations. She sounds wonderful. She's my entire world, Daniel said simply, which is why I need to be clear about something before we go any further with this. Whatever this becomes, Maya's stability comes first. If there's any chance of this affecting her negatively, if the secrecy becomes too complicated or the risk too high, I'll walk away without hesitation. Elena's expression grew serious, appreciative. I respect that. And I promise you, if I ever thought this was putting your daughter at risk, her stability, your custody, anything, I'd end it myself. I meant what I said about using power responsibly. That includes not letting my personal desires harm a child. The tension Daniel hadn't realized he was carrying eased slightly. Okay then, ground rules established. Speaking of ground rules, Elena said, we should probably discuss what we're actually doing here, beyond hoping we're not making a terrible mistake. We're having a second date, Daniel said, seeing if Friday night was a fluke or if there's actually something worth exploring. And if there is? If we both decide we want to continue seeing each other? Daniel considered the question carefully. Then we're very careful. We don't meet anywhere we might be recognized together. We don't discuss this at the office, not even in private. We're scrupulously professional in any work interaction, and we're honest with each other. If it starts feeling too risky or too complicated, we say so immediately. What about telling people? Your brother, my assistant, anyone? Marcus can't know. He'd mean well, but he can't keep a secret to save his life. Your assistant is married to his friend, so same problem. Tell one, eventually tell both. Daniel paused. What about your friends? People you trust? Elena's laugh was bitter. I don't really have friends in the traditional sense. I have business associates, board members, people who want things from me. The closest thing to a genuine friend is Jennifer, and she's also my employee, which complicates everything. The loneliness in that admission made Daniel's chest ache. That sounds isolating. It's practical. Friendship requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires trust, and trust is a luxury I can't afford when every relationship has a power imbalance attached. She met his eyes directly. Which is why this is so strange. You work for me, there's definitely a power imbalance, but somehow I feel like I can trust you anyway. Why is that? Maybe because I don't want anything from you except your company, Daniel said. I'm not networking, not angling for promotion, not interested in your money or connections. I'm just interested in you, the person who funds community programs and remembers being a latchkey kid, who built an empire but still thinks about the people left behind. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. At the gala earlier tonight, I was surrounded by hundreds of people, donors, politicians, other CEOs, all of them wanting something, a photo opportunity, a business connection, a chance to say they know Elena Cross. I smiled and networked and wrote checks, and the entire time I was thinking about coming home to this. To what? To the possibility of a conversation that isn't a negotiation, to spending time with someone who sees me as something other than a resource to be extracted or an obstacle to be overcome. She laughed softly. Listen to me. I sound like a character from a bad romance novel, poor little rich girl who has everything except genuine human connection. You sound lonely, Daniel said gently. There's no shame in that. Loneliness doesn't care about tax brackets. No, it really doesn't. Elena shifted on the couch, angling toward him. Tell me about your volunteer work. You mentioned teaching financial literacy, but what does that actually look like? Daniel felt himself relax into familiar territory. I work with teenagers mostly, kids between 14 and 18. We cover basics, how to create a budget, understand interest rates, recognize predatory lending, build credit responsibly. But it's also about mindset, helping them understand that they deserve financial security, that poverty isn't a moral failing or something they're destined to inherit. That last part is crucial, Elena said. I grew up believing poverty was just the natural state of people like me. It took years and a lot of luck to realize that economic systems are designed to keep certain people trapped. Exactly. These kids are smart and capable, but they're fighting systems that profit from their ignorance. If I can give them tools to fight back, even in small ways, it matters. How did you get involved with Northside Hope specifically? Daniel smiled at the memory. Maya and I were at the park one Saturday, and I started talking to another parent whose kid was in an after-school program there. She mentioned they were looking for volunteers with financial backgrounds. I figured I could spare a few hours a week, do something meaningful with knowledge I'd otherwise just use to make money for Cross Global's investors. You don't love the work, Elena observed. At Cross Global, I mean. I'm good at it, and it pays well enough to support Maya comfortably. That's what matters. Daniel shrugged. But no, it's not what I dreamed about doing when I was getting my MBA. I thought I'd work for a nonprofit focused on economic development, maybe microfinance in underserved communities. Something that actually helped people, rather than just moving money around to make rich people richer. What changed? Reality. Nonprofit salaries don't cover childcare and mortgages and the million small expenses that come with raising a kid alone. I needed stability, benefits, predictable income. So I took the corporate job and found other ways to do work that matters. Elena was studying him with an intensity that made Daniel self-conscious. What? He asked. You're not what I expected, she said finally. Most analysts at Cross Global are there because they want to climb the ladder, make partner, eventually start their own funds. They're ambitious, hungry, willing to sacrifice everything for success. But you're there because it's practical, because it supports the life you want rather than being the life you want. Is that a problem? No, it's refreshing. It also makes me wonder if you're wasted in the position you're in. Daniel tensed slightly. If this is about to become a conversation about favoritism or special treatment, it's not, Elena interrupted. I'm genuinely curious about your career trajectory, about what you'd do if circumstances were different. But you're right to be cautious. I need to be careful about separating personal interest from professional influence. Good, because I meant what I said about walking away if this creates conflicts of interest. I know you did. It's one of the things I find most attractive about you. You have clear boundaries and you're willing to enforce them, even with someone who could make your professional life difficult. Could you? Daniel asked. Make my life difficult, I mean. Not that I think you would, but hypothetically. Elena considered the question seriously. Hypothetically, yes. I could have you transferred to less desirable projects, passed over for promotions, eventually managed out if I wanted to be truly vindictive. But I won't, and not just because we're exploring whatever this is. I don't operate that way. Using personal feelings to manipulate professional situations goes against everything I believe about ethical leadership. That's good to know, Daniel said dryly. Makes the power imbalance slightly less terrifying. Only slightly? You're still the CEO of a billion-dollar company, Elena. There's no getting around the fact that you could destroy my career with a phone call if you wanted to. And you're a single father who could make one call to HR alleging inappropriate conduct and destroy my reputation, Elena countered. Power imbalances cut both ways. Yes, I have corporate authority, but you have the ability to create a scandal that could cost me everything I've built. We're both vulnerable here. Daniel hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. The potential for mutual destruction was probably the closest thing to equal footing they could achieve. So we're both taking a risk, he said, a significant one. Which brings me back to my original question. Is there enough here to justify that risk? Because I need to know before we go any further. Daniel set down his wine glass and took a breath, gathering his thoughts. This was the moment of honesty, the point where he either committed to the possibility of them or backed away to safety. Friday night, I walked into that restaurant expecting an awkward blind date I'd endure out of obligation, he began. I was already composing excuses to leave early, already planning how I'd tell Marcus it didn't work out. Then you appeared, and my first reaction was panic because you were my boss and this was a disaster. Romantic, Elena murmured, but her eyes were warm. Let me finish. That panic lasted through most of dinner, until you started talking about your childhood, about funding community programs, about trying to use power responsibly. And somewhere in that conversation, I stopped seeing the CEO and started seeing someone who understood things I care about, who'd walked similar paths and reached similar conclusions about what matters. He met her eyes directly. I went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about you. Not about Elena Cross, the billionaire, but about the woman who remembered being a latchkey kid, who funds programs anonymously because it keeps focus on the work, who admitted she doesn't know how to be a person outside the office anymore. That woman is worth the risk. Elena's expression had softened during his speech, vulnerability showing through the careful control. I went home that night and told Jennifer to never set me up again because it was too dangerous to let someone see me as human rather than as the CEO. What changed your mind? You did. Monday in my office, when you suggested we could be careful, could find a way to navigate this without destroying either of our professional lives. You made it sound possible, and I realized I wanted it to be possible more than I wanted to be safe. She shifted closer on the couch, and Daniel became acutely aware of the decreasing distance between them, the way the evening light caught in her hair, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with wine and possibility. I'm terrified, Elena admitted, of this failing, of it succeeding, of all the ways it could complicate both our lives. But I'm also tired of letting fear make every decision, of being so careful that I never actually risk anything that matters. So we're doing this, Daniel said. Actually trying. We're trying. Carefully, quietly, with constant evaluation of whether it's working or causing more problems than it's worth. That's very unromantic language for what we're agreeing to. Elena smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. I'm not particularly good at romance. Fair warning. I'm a single father who hasn't been on a real date in 3 years and whose idea of a perfect evening is reading dinosaur books and eating pizza off paper plates. I don't think either of us should have high expectations for conventional romance. Then what should we expect? Daniel considered the question. Honesty. Respect. Understanding that we both have complicated lives that don't easily accommodate traditional relationship structures. And maybe, if we're lucky, moments like this where the complications fade and it's just two people who enjoy each other's company. I can work with that. Elena reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand where it rested on the couch between them. The touch was tentative, testing, asking permission. Daniel turned his hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. The gesture was simple, but it felt momentous, a physical acknowledgement of what they were choosing despite all the logical reasons to choose differently. They sat like that as darkness gathered outside the windows, talking about everything and nothing. Maya's latest obsession with paleontology, Elena's memories of building her first successful business while still in college, Daniel's disastrous attempts at learning to braid hair from YouTube tutorials, Elena's secret addiction to true crime podcasts. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences, the kind of natural rhythm that suggested compatibility beyond just shared values. I should go, Daniel said eventually, checking his watch to find it was nearly 10. Marcus is probably wondering why this blind date is running so long. Does he think you're on a date right now? He thinks I'm on a second attempt at dating after the first one supposedly went nowhere. I'm running out of fictional women to allegedly meet. Elena laughed. The lies we tell to protect the truth. I told Jennifer I was having a quiet evening at home, reading business proposals and recovering from the gala. Technically not a lie. You are home. And there are business proposals on my laptop that I'm definitely not reading. She stood with him, walking to the door but not opening it immediately. When can I see you again? That depends on when you're free and when I can arrange childcare without arousing suspicion. Next weekend? Saturday evening? Daniel mentally reviewed his schedule. Maya has a sleepover at her friend's house Saturday. I was planning to catch up on laundry and meal prep, but I could probably shift those activities around. How romantic, choosing me over laundry. In fairness, I really hate doing laundry. You should feel very special. Elena smiled, and then her expression turned more serious. Daniel, I want you to know, if this ever feels like too much, if the secrecy becomes burdensome or you meet someone else who's actually available and appropriate, I'll understand. I'm asking you to make a lot of compromises for something that might not work out. You're making the same compromises, Daniel pointed out, and for what it's worth, I don't feel like I'm settling or compromising. I feel like I'm choosing something that might actually matter, which is more than I've felt in a long time. He leaned down. She was tall, but he had a few inches on her still, and pressed a kiss to her cheek, keeping it chaste and careful despite the way his heart hammered against his ribs. Her skin was soft and warm, and she smelled like expensive perfume and wine and possibility. Next Saturday, he confirmed, stepping back before he could do something reckless like kiss her properly, like forget all the reasons they were being careful. Next Saturday, Elena agreed, her hand coming up to touch where his lips had been. And Daniel, thank you for taking the chance. Thank you for being worth it. The words hung in the air between them as Daniel left, carrying their weight down the stairs and out into the Chicago night where his car waited at the curb. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, processing the evening, the decision they'd made, the relationship they were choosing to build despite all the obstacles. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Date going well? You've been gone for hours. Better than expected, Daniel typed back. Might see her again. That's my boy. Told you persistence pays off. What's her name? Daniel stared at the question, at the casual inquiry that he couldn't answer honestly. Elena. Her name is Elena Cross, and she's the CEO of my company, and we're about to embark on a secret relationship that could destroy both our careers if anyone finds out. Still keeping that to myself for now, he wrote instead. Don't want to jinx it. Fair enough. Drive safe. Maya's asleep, but she made me promise to tell you that she learned a new dinosaur name today, and you have to quiz her on it tomorrow. Daniel smiled, his life snapping back into focus around the shape of his daughter and the responsibilities that defined his days. Whatever happened with Elena, whatever this relationship became, Maya remained the center of his world. Everything else, even something as unexpected and thrilling as falling for a billionaire CEO, had to orbit around that fundamental truth. He drove home through quiet streets, his mind replaying moments from the evening. Elena's laugh when he'd compared her to Superman, the way her fingers had felt intertwined with his, the vulnerability in her admission that she didn't know how to be a person outside the office anymore, the hope in her eyes when she'd asked if there was enough to justify the risk. The house was dark when he arrived, echoing with Maya's absence in a way that made him acutely aware of how much space a 6-year-old could fill. Daniel went through his nightly routine mechanically, checking locks, setting his phone to charge, changing into sleep clothes, all while his mind circled around the decision he'd made tonight. Dating Elena Cross was objectively insane. The power imbalance, the need for secrecy, the potential for professional disaster if anyone discovered their relationship, any reasonable person would recognize these as massive red flags and walk away. He should walk away. He should text her right now and say he'd reconsidered, that the risks were too high, that they should maintain professional distance and forget Friday night had ever happened. Instead, he fell asleep thinking about next Saturday, about the possibility of building something real with someone who understood loneliness and responsibility, who'd climbed her way out of poverty and still remembered where she came from, who looked at him like he mattered as something more than just employee number 7,000 whatever. The week that followed established a pattern they'd maintain for the next several weeks. At work, they were scrupulously professional on the rare occasions their paths crossed. Daniel attended meetings, reviewed financial projections, and existed in carefully maintained invisibility among his colleagues. Elena appeared in the building occasionally, a distant force that moved through executive floors and boardrooms, never acknowledging him beyond what was appropriate for any other analyst. But in the evenings, after Maya was asleep and the house fell quiet, his phone would light up with texts that felt like secrets shared across impossible distances. Elena would tell him about difficult board meetings and the exhaustion of performing CEO competence for hours on end. Daniel would share Maya's latest pronouncements about dinosaurs and his frustrations with corporate projects that felt meaningless. They'd debate ethics and economics, share book recommendations, build a connection that existed entirely in the spaces between their public lives. Saturday came with the sweet anticipation of seeing Elena again, of stepping out of the careful personas they maintained and into something more honest. Marcus picked up Maya for the sleepover with knowing grins and comments about persistence paying off. Daniel endured the ribbing with good humor, letting his brother believe whatever story he wanted about mysterious dates and slow-burning romance. Elena's address this time led to a restaurant in Evanston, far enough from downtown Chicago that the chance of running into cross-global employees approached zero. It was intimate and quiet, the kind of place that valued discretion over flash, and they sat in a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard. "Maya's at a sleepover?" Elena asked after they'd ordered, her eyes warm with genuine interest. Her best friend Zoe's house. They're probably still awake planning elaborate games involving dinosaurs rescuing princesses from evil scientists. Maya has very specific ideas about narrative structure. She sounds like she's growing up creative and confident. "She's growing up loved," Daniel said simply. "Everything else is just bonus." Elena reached across the table, her hand finding his. The gesture was becoming familiar, this casual physical affection that still felt new and thrilling. "You're a good father. That's rarer than you'd think." You know a lot of bad fathers?" I know a lot of successful men who treat their children like accessories or obligations. You treat Maya like she's your purpose. She is, Daniel said, or part of it anyway. The rest is figuring out how to be someone she'd be proud of, someone who makes choices based on values rather than just convenience or profit. Their food arrived. Daniel had ordered pasta, Elena something with salmon, and they ate while trading stories about their weeks. Elena described a difficult acquisition negotiation, walking Daniel through the ethical considerations of buying a struggling manufacturing company without destroying the existing workforce. Daniel talked about a breakthrough in his financial literacy class, a student who'd finally understood the concept of compound interest and its implications for both debt and savings. You light up when you talk about teaching, Elena observed, more than you ever do discussing work at Cross Global. Because teaching feels like it matters. The work at Cross Global is just math, moving numbers around, optimizing returns, making sure everything adds up correctly. It's not just math, Elena said gently. The analysis you do helps determine which companies we acquire, which restructurings make sense, how we deploy capital. That impacts real people's lives. Maybe. But I'm so far removed from those impacts that it's hard to see the connection. With teaching, I can watch understanding click in a student's eyes, see them start thinking differently about money and possibility. That's immediate and real in a way financial modeling never is. Elena was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Have you ever considered leaving, finding work that aligns better with what you actually care about? Not realistically. I'd take a significant pay cut, and I can't afford that with Maya to support. Plus, there's the whole issue of being a single parent. I need a job with good benefits, reasonable hours, stability. Corporate finance offers all of that. Nonprofits and community organizations don't. What if money wasn't a factor? If you could do any work without worrying about salary? Daniel smiled at the hypothetical. I'd probably work full-time at places like Northside Hope, maybe develop financial literacy curriculum for community organizations across the city. Create programs that actually gave people tools to fight back against predatory systems instead of just documenting those systems in spreadsheets. You've thought about this. I've fantasized about it, Daniel corrected. But fantasy and reality live in different neighborhoods. Reality involves mortgage payments and college savings, and making sure Maya has everything she needs. Elena's expression had shifted into something Daniel couldn't quite read, contemplative and calculating in a way that made him slightly nervous. But before he could ask what she was thinking, she changed the subject. Tell me about Maya's mother. You mentioned she left, but you didn't say much beyond that. Is it too painful to discuss? It's not painful so much as complicated, Daniel said carefully. Sarah was 25 when she got pregnant. We both were. We'd been dating for about a year, thought we were serious enough to build a life together. Then reality hit in the form of a baby who never slept and never stopped needing something. He paused, gathering memories that felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else's life. Sarah tried. I want to be clear about that. She didn't just walk away callously. She genuinely tried to be a mother, to find satisfaction in parenthood. But she couldn't. Every day she sank deeper into resentment and depression, and eventually she was honest enough to admit that forcing herself to stay was destroying her and wouldn't benefit Maya in the long run. That must have been devastating. It was terrifying, Daniel admitted. Suddenly I was alone with a 6-month-old baby and no idea how to handle everything by myself. But it was also clarifying. I couldn't waste energy being angry at Sarah for knowing her limits. I had to focus on being the parent Maya deserved, on building a life that worked for both of us. Do you ever hear from her? Christmas cards, birthday cards for Maya with checks inside. No actual involvement or interest in being part of her life. She remarried 2 years ago, lives in Seattle now. As far as I know, she hasn't had other children. Elena's fingers tightened around his. Maya's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She's the reason I'm sitting here with you instead of still hiding behind work and routine, too afraid to risk anything that might disrupt the careful balance I've built. Is that what I am? A disruption to your careful balance? Absolutely, Daniel said, smiling. The best kind. They lingered over dinner, talking until the restaurant grew quiet around them, and the servers started giving pointed looks toward their table. Outside, Evanston's streets were mostly empty, autumn air carrying the first real bite of approaching winter. Come back to my place? Elena asked as they stood by their cars. Just for a while. I'm not ready for the evening to end yet. Daniel thought about Maya safe at Zoe's house, about the empty home waiting for him, about all the reasons he should maintain careful boundaries and not spend more time alone with Elena than was strictly necessary for a second date. Okay, he said, because careful boundaries were rapidly losing the battle against genuine desire for her company. I'll follow you. The drive back into the city felt charged with anticipation, Elena's taillights leading him through familiar streets that felt transformed by context and possibility. When they reached her building, the night had fully settled, Chicago's light spreading below them like a carpet of stars brought down to earth. Inside her loft, Elena kicked off her shoes and moved to the kitchen with comfortable familiarity. Wine? Coffee? Something stronger? Coffee, actually. I'm still getting used to these late nights. Single-parent hours usually mean I'm asleep by 10. Coffee it is. She busied herself with an expensive-looking espresso machine while Daniel settled on the couch, taking in details he'd missed during his first visit. The books on her shelves were an eclectic mix. Business theory beside literary fiction, economic policy next to poetry. The art on her walls was original, not expensive reproductions, and leaned toward abstract expressionism. Everything spoke of a person with actual interests beyond accumulating wealth, someone who'd carefully curated a space that reflected genuine personality rather than designer taste. Elena brought 2 cups of coffee and settled beside him, closer than she'd sat during his first visit, near enough that he could feel the warmth of her body in the space between them. I've been thinking about something all week, she said, her voice carrying a vulnerable edge, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve. Daniel set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. I'm listening. Us, whatever we're building, it's the first time in years I've felt like someone saw me as more than the CEO or the billionaire or the power player. You look at me like I'm just Elena, like my bank account and business success are interesting details, but not the whole story. She met his eyes directly. That's intoxicating and terrifying because it makes me want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need. What kind of things? Connection, intimacy, someone to come home to who actually knows me rather than the carefully constructed public persona. Her laugh was self-deprecating. Listen to me. I sound like I'm narrating my own therapy session. Daniel reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. You sound honest. I appreciate that. Do you feel the same way? That this is more than just attraction or the thrill of secrecy? Yes, Daniel said without hesitation. I walked into this thinking it was impossible, that we'd have dinner and realize the complications outweighed any potential connection. Instead, I've spent the week looking forward to texts from you, counting down to tonight, feeling more alive than I have in years. That's not just attraction. That's something that could actually matter. Elena shifted closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could probably feel his heart hammering. I want to kiss you, she said softly. But I also don't want to rush this. Don't want to complicate it further before we're sure this is sustainable. Those are very sensible concerns, Daniel managed, acutely aware of her proximity, the warmth of her hand through his shirt, the way her eyes had darkened with want that matched his own. I'm tired of being sensible. Good, Daniel said, and closed the distance between them. The kiss started careful, tentative, both of them testing boundaries and confirming permission. But careful gave way quickly to something deeper, more honest. 3 years of Daniel's loneliness, and however many years of Elena's careful control breaking down under the simple human need for connection. Her hands moved to his hair, his arm curved around her waist, and for several long moments the only thing that existed was this. The taste of her mouth, the soft sound she made when he deepened the kiss, the way she curved into him like she'd been waiting for this as long as he had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. That was overdue? Elena finished, smiling. I was going to say worth the wait, but overdue works too. They stayed like that, wrapped together on the couch while the city lights glittered beyond the windows, trading kisses and quiet conversation until Daniel's phone alarm reminded him it was nearly midnight and he needed to head home before exhaustion made driving dangerous. "Next weekend?" Elena asked at the door, her hair mussed from his fingers, her lips slightly swollen, looking more beautiful than anyone had a right to. "I'll figure out the logistics," Daniel promised. "But yes, definitely yes." The drive home felt different than it had the previous week. Less uncertain, more grounded in the reality of what they were building. Daniel caught himself smiling at traffic lights, replaying the evening in his mind, feeling the lingering warmth of Elena's kisses like a promise against his lips. Whatever complications lay ahead, and he knew there would be complications, risks, moments when the secrecy felt impossible, tonight had proven that what they were building was real enough to be worth it. Elena wasn't just the billionaire CEO anymore. She was the woman who kissed him like he mattered, who shared his values and his loneliness, who was brave enough to risk her carefully controlled world for the possibility of genuine connection. And Daniel Hart, the single father who'd convinced himself he was fine with safe and stable and emotionally distant, was falling for her in ways that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Saturday nights became their anchor point over the following weeks, the regular cadence around which they built a relationship that existed in careful shadows. Daniel became expert at arranging childcare, at creating plausible cover stories, at maintaining the fiction that his life hadn't fundamentally shifted. At work, nothing changed. He remained invisible, efficient, carefully professional in the rare moments when Elena's presence brushed against his orbit. But in the spaces between, in late-night texts and stolen Saturday evenings, they built something real, something that felt worth all the complications they'd have to navigate, something that would soon be tested in ways neither of them anticipated. The test came on a Tuesday morning in early November, 6 weeks after that first accidental dinner at Etoile. Daniel was reviewing quarterly projections when his desk phone rang with an internal extension from HR. "Daniel Hart speaking." "Mr. Hart, this is Patricia Chen from Human Resources. I need you to come down to my office immediately, please. 10th floor, suite 1015. The professional neutrality in her voice sent ice through Daniel's veins. HR didn't summon employees for good news, and the word immediately suggested urgency that made his mind race through possibilities. Had someone seen him with Elena? Had the secrecy failed? Was his career about to implode in exactly the way they'd both feared? "Of course. I'll be right there." He locked his computer with shaking hands and made his way to the elevator, acutely aware of curious glances from colleagues who knew that HR summons were rarely positive. The 10th floor was all polished surfaces and neutral tones, the kind of corporate blandness designed to be calming, but that instead felt sterile and ominous. Patricia Chen was in her 50s, with steel gray hair and the expression of someone who'd delivered bad news so many times she'd perfected the art of professional detachment. She gestured Daniel into her office and closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a cell door closing. "Mr. Hart, thank you for coming down so quickly. Please, have a seat." Daniel sat, his mind still racing through worst-case scenarios. Patricia settled behind her desk and opened a file folder, her expression giving nothing away. "I'll get straight to the point. We've received a complaint regarding some irregularities in several financial projections that came from your department. Specifically, projections related to the Morrison manufacturing acquisition that closed last quarter." Relief and confusion hit simultaneously. This wasn't about Elena. This was about work. Actual work. "Irregularities?" Daniel leaned forward. "I reviewed those projections personally. They were sound, conservative even. What kind of irregularities are we talking about?" The complaint alleges that certain cost estimates were deliberately understated to make the acquisition appear more profitable than it actually was, that revenue projections were inflated, and that debt obligations were minimized in a way that misrepresented Morrison's actual financial position. "That's not possible," Daniel said flatly. "I ran those numbers myself multiple times. I built in conservative estimates specifically to avoid overpromising on returns. Who made this complaint?" Patricia consulted her file. "That information is confidential at this stage. What I can tell you is that the complaint was made directly to our ethics hotline, and company policy requires a full investigation of any allegations involving financial misconduct." The implications were starting to sink in. Financial misconduct at a private equity firm wasn't just a fireable offense. It was the kind of thing that could destroy entire careers, make him radioactive in the industry. And someone had specifically targeted the Morrison acquisition, one of the few deals Daniel had been personally proud of because it had been structured to preserve jobs rather than maximize short-term profits. Patricia, I'll cooperate fully with any investigation, but I'm telling you right now, those projections were accurate. If there are discrepancies between what I submitted and what's in the final acquisition documents, someone altered my work after I submitted it. That's certainly one possibility we'll explore. Patricia's tone remained neutral, professional. In the meantime, you're being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. You'll need to surrender your access badge and company laptop before leaving the building today. The words hit like a physical blow. Administrative leave. The corporate equivalent of house arrest. The professional purgatory where careers went to die quietly while HR conducted investigations that almost always resulted in termination. How long? Daniel managed. These investigations typically take 2 to 3 weeks. You'll continue to receive your salary during this period. If the investigation clears you of wrongdoing, you'll be reinstated. If it finds evidence supporting the allegations, she trailed off, the implication clear. Daniel thought about Maya, about the mortgage payments and health insurance, and the carefully constructed stability he'd built his entire life around. He thought about Elena, about whether this was somehow connected to their relationship, whether someone had discovered them and was using this as a weapon. Can I at least know what specifically I'm being accused of? Exact numbers, specific claims? Patricia slid a document across the desk. This is a summary of the allegations. You're welcome to review it and provide your response in writing within the next week. Any documentation you have supporting your position should be submitted to me directly. Daniel scanned the document, his trained eye catching the details immediately. The allegations weren't just wrong, they were sophisticated enough to seem plausible to anyone who didn't know the actual numbers. Revenue projections inflated by 12%. Cost estimates understated by 15%. Debt obligations minimized through creative accounting that bordered on fraudulent. None of it was true. But all of it was the kind of technical detail that would take weeks to disprove, that would require pulling original files and demonstrating that these weren't his numbers at all. This is a setup, Daniel said quietly. Someone altered my work and then reported me for the alterations they made. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Hart. And falsely accusing me of financial misconduct isn't serious. Anger was starting to burn through the shock. Patricia, I've worked here for 5 years. My record is spotless. Why would I suddenly decide to commit fraud on one acquisition? Those are questions the investigation will address. For now, I need your badge and laptop. The walk back to his desk to collect his personal belongings felt surreal, like moving through someone else's nightmare. Colleagues watched with poorly concealed curiosity as he packed his few personal items. A photo of Maya, the coffee mug she'd decorated for Father's Day, the Cubs calendar Marcus had given him as a joke. Josh appeared at his cubicle, concern written across his face. Hart, what's going on? Are you okay? Administrative leave, Daniel said, keeping his voice neutral. Some kind of investigation. I'm sure it'll get cleared up. That's rough, man. Let me know if you need anything, yeah? Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to say more without his carefully maintained composure cracking. He surrendered his badge and laptop to building security, signed paperwork confirming the terms of his administrative leave, and walked out of the Cross Global building into gray November afternoon that felt like mockery. His phone buzzed with a text before he'd even reached his car. Elena. My office. Now. Use the visitor entrance. Daniel stared at the message, torn between relief that she knew and terror about what that meant. He walked the 3 blocks to the main visitor entrance, showed his ID to security, and was issued a temporary badge that felt like a scarlet letter announcing his diminished status. Jennifer met him at the elevator with an expression of professional sympathy that suggested she knew exactly what had happened. She escorted him to Elena's office in silence, knocked once, and departed without a word. Elena stood at her windows, her back to the door, silhouetted against the city skyline. She didn't turn when Daniel entered, didn't acknowledge his presence immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Tell me you didn't do it. The words cut deeper than Patricia's corporate neutrality. You have to ask? I have to ask because I'm the CEO of this company, and there are allegations of serious misconduct, and I need to hear you say it directly. She turned to face him, and Daniel saw the conflict in her eyes. The woman who cared about him warring with the executive who had responsibilities beyond personal feelings. Did you manipulate those projections? No. I ran conservative numbers deliberately because the Morrison acquisition was about preserving jobs, not maximizing returns. Someone altered my work after I submitted it, and then reported me for the alterations. Elena's shoulders dropped slightly, relief visible despite her attempt at professional distance. I needed to hear you say it. I know you, I trust you, but I also had to ask directly. How did you find out so fast? Patricia is required to inform me of any ethics investigations involving senior analysts. I got the notification about 30 seconds before I texted you. Elena moved away from the windows, but she didn't approach him, maintaining careful physical distance that felt deliberate. I've pulled the original files from the server. Your initial projections were exactly as you described, conservative, well-documented, completely appropriate. The numbers in the final acquisition documents were altered, but not by you. Can you prove that? I can prove the files were modified after you submitted them. What I can't immediately prove is who made the modifications or why. The changes were made from a shared department login that multiple analysts have access to. Daniel sank into one of the chairs facing her desk, exhaustion and relief warring with growing anger. This was deliberate. Someone set me up, altered my work, and then reported me knowing it would trigger an investigation. That's what it looks like, yes. Elena finally moved closer, perching on the edge of her desk. The question is why? What would someone gain from destroying your career? The implication hung between them, unspoken but obvious. Someone who knew about their relationship, someone who wanted to hurt Elena by targeting him, someone who saw opportunity in creating a scandal that could damage the CEO's reputation. Do you think someone knows? Daniel asked quietly. About us? I don't see how they could. We've been careful. We never meet anywhere public, never communicate through company systems, never give any indication at work that we're anything other than CEO and analyst who've never spoken. But doubt crept into her voice. Unless we missed something. Unless someone followed one of us or noticed a pattern we didn't see. Or unless someone's fishing, Daniel said, thinking it through. Create a crisis that forces us to interact. Watch how we respond. Look for evidence of personal involvement. Elena's expression sharpened. That's actually brilliant if you're trying to expose a hidden relationship. Force the CEO to either throw the analyst under the bus or show favoritism in defending him. Either response reveals something. So what do we do? Professionally, I recuse myself from the investigation. I've already informed Patricia that I have a potential conflict of interest, and the investigation should be handled by an outside firm. Elena's voice was crisp, decisive. I'll ensure they have access to all the original files, all the documentation they need to prove your innocence. But I can't be seen as intervening personally on your behalf. And personally? Personally, I'm going to find out who did this and why, and they're going to regret targeting you. The fury in her eyes was cold and focused. The billionaire CEO who'd built an empire and wasn't afraid to defend it. No one sabotages my employees and gets away with it. Elena, if this is about us, if someone knows or suspects, confronting them directly could confirm their suspicions. I'm aware, which is why I'll be very, very careful about how I proceed. She met his eyes directly. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. If this investigation goes badly, if someone really has constructed a case that's difficult to disprove, I can't protect you without exposing our relationship. And exposing our relationship destroys us both professionally. The words were brutal in their honesty, but Daniel appreciated the directness. I understand. If it comes down to choosing between protecting me and protecting yourself and the company, you choose yourself and the company. That's the logical choice. But is it the choice you'll actually make? Elena was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she admitted finally, and that terrifies me because I've always known exactly what I'd choose in any given situation. My entire career has been built on making hard decisions without hesitation, but you've complicated that clarity in ways I'm still trying to process. Daniel stood, moving toward her despite knowing it was risky, that anyone could walk in, that they were already pushing boundaries just by having this conversation. For what it's worth, I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for me. Maya needs me to have a career, not a martyr who threw away everything for a relationship that might not even survive the pressure. Very practical, Elena said, but there was warmth in her eyes despite the tension. I learned from the best. They stood close enough that Daniel could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes, could feel the heat of her body in the space between them. Every instinct screamed to touch her, to seek comfort and physical connection, but the rational part of his brain, the part that understood they were already taking enormous risks, kept his hands at his sides. I should go, he said. Let the investigation proceed, cooperate fully, and hope whoever set this up made mistakes we can find. Keep your phone on. I'll text you if I learn anything. And Daniel? She touched his hand briefly, a gesture so quick it could have been accidental. We'll fix this, I promise. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that her resources and power could solve any problem. But walking out of the Cross Global building for the second time that day, his visitor badge already surrendered, his career in limbo and his future uncertain, belief felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. The drive home took him through Chicago streets that felt different in afternoon light, like he was seeing the city from the perspective of someone who no longer belonged to the professional world that defined it. He picked up Maya from school early, enduring her delighted surprise at the unexpected schedule change, and spent the afternoon at the park watching her play with other kids whose fathers presumably weren't facing career-ending investigations. "Daddy, you're being quiet," Maya observed during dinner, her 6-year-old instincts picking up on emotions he thought he'd hidden. "Are you sad?" "Just tired, sweetheart. Work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it bad work stuff?" Daniel considered how much honesty was appropriate for a first grader. "It's complicated work stuff, but I'll figure it out, okay?" "I always do." She seemed satisfied with that answer, returning to her elaborate story about the dragon at school who was actually a dinosaur in disguise. Daniel listened with half his attention, while the other half churned through possibilities and consequences, trying to find the shape of the trap he'd walked into. His phone buzzed after Maya was asleep, Elena's name lighting up the screen. "I found something. Can you talk?" He stepped out onto the back porch, November cold biting through his sweater. "Yes. What did you find?" "The modifications to your files weren't random. They followed a specific pattern, inflating projections just enough to trigger ethics concerns without being obviously fraudulent. Whoever did this knows financial modeling well enough to make it look plausible. That doesn't narrow it down much. Half the analysts in my department could do that." "True, but the timing is interesting. The modifications were made on October 23rd, the day after the Morrison acquisition closed. Someone waited until the deal was finalized before altering the projections, which suggests they wanted to avoid impacting the actual transaction." Daniel thought back to late October, trying to remember anything unusual. That was the week of the company-wide meeting. Most of the department was in the conference center all day. Exactly. Easy opportunity for someone to access the shared login without being noticed. "I'm pulling security footage from that day, seeing if we can identify who was at their desk when they should have been in the meeting." "Elena, you're conducting your own investigation. That's exactly what you said you wouldn't do." "I said I wouldn't intervene in the official investigation. I didn't say I wouldn't pursue my own inquiries through channels available to me as CEO." "There's a difference. A technical one. I'm very good with technicalities. It's how I built a billion-dollar company." Despite everything, Daniel smiled. "What happens if you find proof it was a setup?" "Then I present that proof to the outside investigator, who clears you, and whoever tried to destroy your career gets fired and possibly prosecuted for fraud. Clean, professional, no indication of personal involvement on my part. And if they realize you dug this deep into one analyst's case specifically, I'll say I have a professional interest in ensuring our ethics investigation process is actually catching real misconduct rather than being used as a weapon against innocent employees." Which is true, just not the complete truth. The complete truth is complicated and potentially damaging to multiple parties. I'm comfortable with the version I'm prepared to defend publicly. Daniel leaned against the porch railing, watching his breath fog in the cold air. "Thank you. For believing me, for looking into this, for taking risks you probably shouldn't take. You're worth the risk. Though I'd appreciate it if you didn't make a habit of being accused of financial crimes. It's very stressful. I'll do my best. Any other accusation should be for more interesting crimes. Art theft, maybe. International espionage. Much more acceptable. Those at least have style. They texted for another hour, the conversation sliding from investigation strategy into the easier territory of shared humor and the kind of comfortable exchange that suggested their relationship had developed deeper roots than either had planned. When Daniel finally went to bed, exhaustion pulling him down into sleep, he felt fractionally better than he had walking out of the Cross Global building that afternoon. Elena was on his side. She was using her considerable resources and intelligence to unravel the trap, and whatever happened professionally, at least he knew he hadn't faced this alone. The investigation ground forward over the next week with the inexorable pace of corporate bureaucracy. Daniel submitted his written response to Patricia, laying out exactly how his original projections had been altered and pointing to documentation that proved the timeline of changes. He spent hours pulling files from his personal backup drives, reconstructing his work in painful detail, building a case for his own innocence that felt exhausting and slightly absurd. Marcus called daily, offering support and asking questions Daniel couldn't fully answer. Maya noticed his stress despite his attempts to hide it, becoming more clingy and prone to nightmares that required Daniel's presence to chase away. The routine of his life continued, meals and bedtime stories and weekend trips to the park, but it all felt precarious, like he was performing normalcy over a foundation that could crack apart at any moment. Elena texted updates when she had them, brief messages that suggested she was making progress but couldn't share details yet. They didn't see each other during that week, the risk too high, and Daniel's emotional state too fragile for the pretense that would be required. He missed her with an intensity that surprised him, craving the comfort of her presence and the certainty of her belief in him. On Friday afternoon, 10 days after the initial summons to HR, Daniel's phone rang with Patricia Chen's extension. "Mr. Hart, I need you to come in Monday morning at 9. We have results from the investigation." His heart kicked hard against his ribs. "Results? Does that mean you've reached a conclusion?" "It means we need to discuss our findings. Monday at 9, please. Same office." She hung up before he could ask anything else, leaving Daniel staring at his phone and trying to read meaning into her tone. Results could mean exoneration. Results could mean termination. Results could mean they still didn't know and were preparing to drag this out further. He texted Elena immediately. HR called. Results. Monday at 9. Her response came within seconds. "I know. I'll be there. You recused yourself from the investigation." "I recused myself from conducting it. I didn't recuse myself from being present when results are delivered to one of my employees. That's well within my role as CEO. Elena, if you're there and they clear me, it's going to look like favoritism. If I'm there and they clear you, it looks like a CEO who takes ethics investigations seriously enough to personally ensure they're conducted properly. Let me worry about optics. You focus on getting through the weekend. Getting through the weekend meant keeping Maya entertained and distracted, which Daniel accomplished through a combination of museum visits, movie marathons, and letting her eat slightly too much ice cream. By Sunday evening, exhaustion and anxiety had worn him down to a numb acceptance that whatever happened Monday would happen, regardless of how much he worried about it. He dropped Maya at school Monday morning with extra hugs and promises to pick her up right on time, then made the drive to Cross Global's headquarters with his stomach in knots. The visitor badge process felt slightly less humiliating this time, or maybe he'd just gotten used to the reduction in status. Patricia's office looked exactly the same as it had 10 days ago. Same neutral tones, same corporate blandness. But this time, when Daniel entered, he found Elena already there, sitting in one of the chairs facing Patricia's desk. She wore a charcoal suit that was all business and authority, her expression professionally neutral, giving no indication they'd exchanged dozens of texts over the past week, or that she'd spent considerable time investigating his case. "Mr. Hart, thank you for coming. Please, sit." Daniel took the chair beside Elena, carefully not looking at her, maintaining the fiction that they were CEO and analyst who'd never had reason to interact beyond the most cursory professional contact. Patricia opened a thick folder, her expression giving nothing away. We've completed our investigation into the allegations of financial misconduct related to the Morrison Manufacturing acquisition. The investigation was conducted by Thornton and Associates, an independent forensic accounting firm with no prior relationship to Cross Global Enterprises. She paused, and Daniel fought the urge to demand she just get to the conclusion, to end the suspense that was making it hard to breathe. The investigation found no evidence that you, Daniel Hart, engaged in any misconduct related to the Morrison acquisition or any other transactions. In fact, the evidence clearly demonstrates that your original projections were accurate, conservative, and professionally executed. Relief flooded through Daniel so intensely he felt dizzy. They were altered after I submitted them. Yes, the investigation identified that the modifications were made from a shared departmental login on October 23rd at approximately 2:15 p.m. Security footage and login records indicate the changes were made by Stephen Bradley, a junior analyst in your department. Daniel's mind raced, trying to place the name. Stephen Bradley, mid-20s, ambitious, always angling for high-profile projects. They'd worked together on a few analyses, but never closely. Why would Bradley alter my work and then report me for it? Patricia consulted her notes. According to his statement to the investigators, Mr. Bradley was approached by an external party who offered him $50,000 to sabotage your career. He claims he didn't know why you were being targeted, just that someone wanted you discredited and removed from Cross Global. The room felt like it was tilting. Who? Who paid him? Mr. Bradley claims he doesn't know the person's real identity. All contact was through encrypted messages and anonymous payment. However, the investigators were able to trace the payment to an offshore account connected to Margaret Sinclair. Elena's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw her fingers tighten on the arm of her chair. Margaret Sinclair, she said, her voice carefully controlled. The board member who's been pushing for more aggressive acquisition strategies. The same, Patricia confirmed. Ms. Sinclair has been placed on administrative leave from the board pending further investigation into her involvement. Mr. Bradley has been terminated and is facing potential criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. Daniel tried to process this. Margaret Sinclair was a board member he'd barely interacted with, someone who existed in the rarefied executive stratosphere far above his level. Why would a board member care about destroying a senior analyst's career? That makes no sense. Patricia and Elena exchanged a look that suggested they knew more than they were saying. It was Elena who answered, her tone measured and professional. Ms. Sinclair has been advocating for Cross Global to adopt more aggressive acquisition strategies that prioritize short-term profits over long-term sustainability. Your analysis of the Morrison acquisition, with its conservative projections and focus on preserving jobs, was used by other board members to argue against her proposed changes to company policy. By discrediting you, she hoped to discredit the approach you represented. It was a reasonable explanation. It might even be true. But Daniel caught something in Elena's eyes that suggested there were layers to this he wasn't hearing, complications that couldn't be discussed in Patricia's office with official investigation results being delivered. So I'm cleared, he said, needing to hear it stated plainly. Completely, Patricia confirmed. Your administrative leave ends immediately, and you're welcome to return to work as early as this afternoon if you choose. We'll be issuing a formal letter of apology for the disruption to your employment, and your personnel file will reflect that the investigation found no wrongdoing on your part. What about the damage to his reputation? Elena asked, her CEO voice sharp with authority. Other employees know he was under investigation. There will be assumptions, gossip, potential impact on his professional relationships within the company. We'll be sending a department-wide communication clarifying that Mr. Hart was fully exonerated and that the investigation revealed he was the victim of deliberate sabotage. We'll make it clear that the company has complete confidence in his integrity and capabilities. Good. Elena stood, and Daniel followed her lead automatically. Mr. Hart, welcome back. I trust this incident won't discourage you from continuing the excellent work you've been doing for Cross Global. The formality of her words was belied by the warmth in her eyes, visible for just a moment before professional distance reasserted itself. Thank you, Ms. Cross. I appreciate the company's thoroughness in investigating the matter. They left Patricia's office together but separated in the hallway, Elena heading to the executive elevators while Daniel made his way to the regular bank that would carry him back to the 27th floor. back to his cubicle and his colleagues and the familiar routine of work that had felt so precarious for the past 10 days. Josh practically leaped out of his chair when Daniel appeared. "Hart, you're back. What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Completely exonerated. Turns out someone was sabotaging my work and trying to make me look incompetent." "That's insane. Who would do that?" "Someone who's no longer with the company," Daniel said, which was true if incomplete. "Anyway, I'm back. What did I miss while I was gone?" The afternoon passed in a blur of catching up on work and fielding questions from colleagues who were curious about his sudden departure and return. Daniel kept his answers vague and professional, letting the official company communication handle the details. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, he was exhausted, but also relieved to be back in his normal routine, the crisis resolved and his career intact. His phone buzzed as he was packing up for the day. "Elena, my place tonight? We need to talk about what happened. I'll order dinner. I need to pick up Maya first. Get her settled with a babysitter. Bring her with you." Daniel stared at the message, surprise overriding exhaustion. "You want me to bring my 6-year-old daughter to your secret loft apartment?" "I want to meet her, and I think we're past the point of pretending this is casual enough that she shouldn't know I exist. We don't have to tell her everything, but she should know you're dating someone." The implication settled over Daniel like a warm blanket and a heavy responsibility all at once. Introducing Maya to Elena meant acknowledging this relationship was serious, that it had a future, that the complications and risks were worth navigating together. It meant letting his daughter into a part of his life he'd kept carefully separate, trusting that Elena would stay around long enough that Maya's attachment wouldn't become another source of loss. "Okay," he typed finally. "But fair warning, she's going to have approximately 6,000 questions about everything in your apartment and will probably try to recruit you into whatever elaborate game she's currently obsessed with. I'm prepared. I've faced hostile board members and aggressive acquisition negotiations. I think I can handle one 6-year-old. We'll see about that. Give me 2 hours." Daniel picked up Maya from her after-school program, enduring her excited questions about why he was early and what they were doing tonight. In the car, he took a breath and tried to figure out how to explain this in age-appropriate terms. "Maya, you know how Daddy has been going out sometimes on weekends, meeting with a friend." "Your girlfriend," Maya said matter-of-factly, surprising him. "What makes you think I have a girlfriend?" "Because you smile at your phone all the time now, and you wear nice shirts even when we're just going to the park, and Uncle Marcus keeps making weird faces and saying things about Daddy having secrets." She grinned at him in the rearview mirror. "Is she nice?" "She's very nice," Daniel said, adjusting to the reality that his daughter was apparently more observant than he'd given her credit for. "And she wants to meet you tonight. We're going to her apartment for dinner. Is that okay with you?" "Does she like dinosaurs?" "I don't know. You'll have to ask her." "Does she have games at her apartment?" "I don't think so, but can I bring my coloring books?" "Sure, sweetheart. We can bring coloring books." The drive to Elena's loft felt surreal, Maya chattering in the back seat about what questions she was going to ask Daddy's girlfriend, while Daniel tried not to think too hard about the significance of this moment. He was introducing the two most important people in his life to each other. He was trusting Elena with his daughter, and trusting Maya with the secret of his relationship, and hoping desperately that this wouldn't end in the kind of complicated disaster he'd spent 3 years trying to avoid. Elena answered the door in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair down and her expression nervous in a way Daniel had never seen before. She looked younger like this, less CEO, and more just a woman about to meet her boyfriend's daughter for the first time. "Hi," she said, her eyes moving from Daniel to Maya and back again. "You must be Maya. I'm Elena. It's nice to finally meet you." Maya studied her with the serious consideration 6-year-olds brought to important assessments. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Elena didn't miss a beat. "I think dinosaurs are fascinating. Did you know that some of the best dinosaur fossils ever found were discovered right here in the United States?" Maya's eyes lit up. "Really? Which ones?" "Well, there's Sue the T-Rex at the Field Museum downtown. She's one of the most complete T-Rex skeletons ever found." "I've seen Sue. She's amazing." Maya turned to Daniel. "Daddy, Elena knows about Sue." That's great, sweetheart. Daniel caught Elena's eye over Maya's head, mouthing thank you for the perfect opening response. They moved into the apartment, Maya immediately gravitating to the windows with their view of the park. Wow, you can see so far. Do you have binoculars? Sometimes birds come to our yard and Daddy lets me use binoculars to watch them. I don't have binoculars, Elena admitted, but that's a great idea. Maybe we should get some. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. Elena had ordered pizza, Maya's favorite, and they ate while Maya told elaborate stories about school and her friends and the dinosaur project she was working on for science class. Elena listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing her own stories about being in first grade in ways that made Maya giggle and declare her really cool for a grown-up. After dinner, Maya spread her coloring books across Elena's coffee table and insisted both adults help her color a scene of dinosaurs in a jungle. Elena proved to be meticulous about staying inside the lines, which Maya appreciated, while Daniel deliberately colored a purple brontosaurus that Maya found hilarious. Daddy, dinosaurs aren't purple. How do you know? Were you there 65 million years ago? No, but scientists were. Maya turned to Elena. Right? Scientists know what colors dinosaurs were? Actually, Elena said carefully, scientists aren't completely sure what colors dinosaurs were. They can make educated guesses based on what animals today look like, but they don't know for certain. So maybe Daddy's purple dinosaur is scientifically accurate after all. Maya considered this seriously. Okay, but mine is going to be green because that makes sense for camouflage. Excellent reasoning, Elena said, and the look she gave Daniel over Maya's bent head was warm with affection and something deeper, something that made his chest tight with feeling he wasn't quite ready to name. By 8:30, Maya was yawning despite her protests that she wasn't tired yet. Daniel gathered her coloring books and helped her into her jacket, preparing for the drive home. Can we come back? Maya asked Elena at the door. Maybe next time you could have binoculars and we could watch for birds together? I'd like that, Elena said softly. Maybe your dad can bring you by again soon. Thank you, Daniel said, meaning it for more than just the evening, for the patience and genuine interest she'd shown Maya, for being willing to let his daughter into her carefully controlled world. We'll talk tomorrow? Definitely. Elena touched his arm briefly, a gesture Maya definitely noticed if her knowing smile was any indication. Drive safe. In the car, Maya was quiet for about 30 seconds before launching into her analysis. I like Elena. She's smart and she knows about dinosaurs, and she didn't talk to me like I'm a baby. I'm glad you like her, sweetheart. Are you going to marry her? Daniel nearly drove off the road. What? Why would you ask that? Because you look at her the way people look at each other in movies before they get married, all smiley and soft. We're just dating right now, Maya. Marriage is a very big step that requires a lot of time and discussion. But maybe someday? Maybe someday, Daniel agreed, because lying to his daughter about possibilities felt wrong, even when those possibilities terrified him. Is that okay with you, that I'm dating someone? Maya was quiet for a moment, and Daniel watched her in the rear-view mirror, trying to read her expression in the passing streetlights. I think it's good, she said finally. You're not as sad when you text with her, and she seems nice. Plus she knows about Sue, which is really important. Those are all excellent points. But Daddy, if you do marry her someday, can we make sure there's room in the house for all my dinosaurs? Because I'm going to have a lot more by then. I promise any future house will have room for all the dinosaurs you need. That seemed to satisfy her, and she fell asleep before they made it home, her head tilted against the car window in a position that would probably make her neck hurt later. Daniel carried her inside and up to bed, pulling off her shoes and tucking blankets around her small form. She stirred slightly. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams. His phone buzzed as he was cleaning up downstairs. Elena. She's wonderful, smart, curious, kind. You're raising an amazing human being. She likes you too. Apparently you passed the Sue test, which is the highest compliment she can give. I'm honored. Also terrified. I've negotiated with billionaires and politicians without breaking a sweat, but making sure I didn't screw up meeting your daughter was the most nerve-wracking thing I've done in years. You were perfect. Thank you for being patient with her, for taking her seriously, for letting her into your space. Thank you for trusting me with her. I know that wasn't easy. Daniel sat on his couch, looking at his phone and thinking about the evening, about Maya coloring dinosaurs next to Elena, about the way Elena had listened to his daughter's stories like they mattered, about the quiet domestic scene they'd created that felt both impossible and exactly right. "We should talk about Margaret Sinclair," he typed, "about why a board member would really go to such lengths to discredit me." The response took longer this time. "Not over text, but yes, we need to talk about that. There are layers to what happened that couldn't be discussed in front of HR. When? Soon. But tonight, let's just appreciate that you're cleared, that the crisis is resolved, and that Maya now knows I exist. Those are all good things. They are. Thank you, Elena, for everything. Thank you for taking the chance on me, for letting me complicate your carefully controlled life. Best complication I ever signed up for." Daniel set down his phone and leaned back against the couch, exhaustion and relief and cautious happiness washing over him in waves. The investigation was over. His career was intact. His daughter had met the woman he was falling in love with, and there it was, the thought he'd been avoiding, the feeling he hadn't wanted to name. He was falling in love with Elena Cross. Maybe had already fallen somewhere between that first disastrous dinner and tonight, watching her color purple dinosaurs with his daughter and talk about Sue the T-Rex like it was the most important conversation in the world. It was terrifying and exhilarating and everything he'd sworn he wouldn't risk again after Sarah left. But Elena wasn't Sarah. Elena chose to be here, chose the complications, chose him and Maya despite having every reason to walk away and return to her uncomplicated billionaire life. Whatever happened next, whatever Margaret Sinclair's real motivations had been, whatever new challenges awaited them, they would face it together. Not as CEO and analyst, not as billionaire and single father, but as two people who'd found something real in the middle of impossible circumstances. And for tonight, that was enough. The conversation about Margaret Sinclair came 3 days later, over coffee at Elena's loft on a Thursday evening while Maya was at a playdate. Elena had been unusually quiet when Daniel arrived, her expression troubled in a way that suggested the truth behind the investigation was more complicated than what had been shared in Patricia's office. "Margaret Sinclair didn't just want to discredit your analysis of the Morrison acquisition," Elena said without preamble, settling onto the couch beside him. "She wanted to discredit you specifically because she'd been watching us." Daniel's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "She knew? About us?" "Not definitively, but she suspected. Margaret's been on the board for 8 years. She knows me well enough to notice when something changes in my behavior. And apparently I've been different these past few months. Smiling more, leaving board meetings early, being less available for evening functions." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Turns out happiness is suspicious when you're a CEO who's spent years being nothing but professionally focused." "So she hired Bradley to sabotage me as what? A test? To see how you'd react?" "Partly, and partly because she genuinely opposed the conservative acquisition strategy your Morrison analysis supported. Destroying your credibility served both purposes. It would have eliminated a voice for approaches she disagreed with, and if I'd defended you too vigorously, it would have confirmed her suspicions about our relationship." Daniel set down his coffee, processing the implications. "You said she's been placed on administrative leave. Does that mean she's facing consequences for this?" "She's being forced to resign from the board, quietly, with a settlement that includes strict non-disclosure agreements. The board wants to avoid the scandal of public accusations against a member, so they're making the problem disappear through money and legal pressure. And the truth about why she really targeted me? About her suspicions regarding us?" Elena met his eyes directly. "That stays buried under the official story about disagreements over acquisition strategy. As far as anyone knows, Margaret's resignation is unrelated to the investigation into your case. She's leaving to pursue other opportunities, and Cross Global wishes her well in future endeavors." That's very sanitized. That's how these things work at this level. Public scandals hurt everyone involved, including innocent parties. Better to resolve it quietly and move forward. Elena paused, her expression conflicted. "But Daniel, you should know, the board is now aware that Margaret suspected a relationship between us. They don't have proof, and without her around to push the issue, They're not going to investigate further. But there's been discussion about whether there need to be clearer policies about relationships between executives and employees. The implications were obvious. They're going to implement rules that would make our relationship officially prohibited. They're considering it. The proposal won't come to a vote for another few months, which gives us time to decide how we want to handle this. Daniel leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. Our options are to end this before it becomes officially forbidden, or to go public before the rules change and deal with whatever fallout comes from disclosure. Or we continue as we have been, carefully, privately, and hope we can navigate whatever new policies emerge. Elena's voice was steady, but her eyes revealed uncertainty. None of those options are ideal. No, they're really not. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Maya coloring dinosaurs beside Elena, about the text that had become the best part of his days, about the feeling of coming home to something real after 3 years of emotional isolation. What do you want to do? I want to stop hiding, Elena said quietly. I want to take you to dinner at restaurants we'd actually enjoy instead of places chosen for their distance from anyone who might recognize us. I want to acknowledge that I'm dating someone without it being a corporate scandal. I want to meet Marcus and let Maya come here without worrying about who might see us together. That's a lot of wanting for someone who spent years being careful about every personal decision. You make me want to be reckless. I thought I'd made peace with loneliness as the price of success. But then you showed up at that restaurant looking like your own execution and somehow turned into the most honest, frustrating, wonderful complication I've encountered in years. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I'm tired of choosing between my career and actual human connection. There has to be a way to have both. Daniel thought about the practical realities. The power imbalance that would always exist as long as he worked for Cross Global, the potential for accusations of favoritism regardless of the truth, the way their relationship would be scrutinized and judged by people who had opinions about how CEOs should conduct their personal lives. I could leave Cross Global, he said slowly, testing the idea. Find another position somewhere else. Remove the direct employment relationship. We'd still face some scrutiny because of who you are, but at least the immediate conflict of interest would be resolved. Elena's grip on his hand tightened. I won't ask you to give up your career for this relationship. That's not fair or sustainable. You're not asking, I'm offering, and honestly, I've been thinking about it anyway, about finding work that actually aligns with what I care about instead of just providing a stable paycheck. The investigation made me realize how much I've been settling for good enough instead of actually good. Where would you go? What would you do? I don't know yet. Maybe something with Northside Hope or similar organizations, developing financial literacy programs full-time instead of just volunteering on weekends. Maybe consulting for nonprofits that need financial expertise but can't afford full-time analysts. Maybe starting something new entirely. He turned to face her fully. The point is, I have options, and choosing to explore those options because it lets me have an actual relationship with you isn't sacrifice. It's choosing what matters. Elena's eyes had gone bright with emotion she was clearly fighting to control. You're serious. You'd actually leave Cross Global so we could be together openly. I'd leave Cross Global because it's time for me to stop hiding behind stability and actually build the life I want. The fact that it also solves our relationship problem is just convenient alignment. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. But Elena, this only works if you're equally committed. I'm not doing this for some casual thing that might fizzle out in a few months. I'm talking about building something real, something that includes Maya and messy family dinners, and actually planning a future together. I want that, Elena said, her voice thick with feeling. All of it. The messiness, the commitment, the future. I want to stop being so careful that I forget how to actually live. They kissed then, deep and desperate and full of relief that they'd found a path forward through the complications. When they finally broke apart, Elena was smiling in a way that transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. So we're doing this, she said. You're leaving Cross Global, we're going public with our relationship, and we're dealing with whatever consequences come from that decision. Apparently so. Though I should probably find another job before I resign. Dramatic gestures are great in theory, but mortgage payments require practical planning. Elena laughed. Very sensible. I like that about you. You can be romantic and practical simultaneously. It's one of my few talents. Daniel's phone buzzed with a reminder that he needed to pick up Maya in 30 minutes. I should go, but we should probably discuss logistics, how we go public when we tell people, how we handle the transition. Dinner this weekend? Somewhere actually nice, somewhere we don't have to hide. We can talk through the details and start making plans. I'd like that. Though fair warning, once we're public, you're going to have to endure family dinners with Marcus, who will absolutely embarrass me with stories from our childhood. I'm prepared. I've negotiated hostile takeovers and aggressive board challenges. I think I can handle your brother. You say that now, but you haven't heard the story about the time I accidentally set our garage on fire trying to build a robot. Now I'm even more intrigued. Definitely want to hear that one. Daniel left feeling lighter than he had in weeks, maybe years. Yes, there were still complications to navigate and logistics to arrange, but they had a plan. More importantly, they had commitment to each other, to building something real, to choosing possibility over safety. The following weeks unfolded with the methodical precision of people executing a carefully considered plan. Daniel quietly began networking, reaching out to contacts in the nonprofit sector, exploring opportunities that would align work with values. Elena consulted with her lawyers and advisors about the best approach to disclosing a relationship that would inevitably attract media attention and corporate scrutiny. They told Marcus first over dinner at Daniel's house, while Maya was already asleep upstairs. Marcus's reaction cycled through shock, disbelief, concern, and finally delighted acceptance when he realized his blind date setup had accidentally created the connection, even if not in the way anyone had planned. I set you up with the CEO of your company, he repeated for the third time, still processing, without knowing it. That's either the best matchmaking I've ever done or the worst. I can't decide which. Both, Daniel said dryly. Definitely both. But you're happy? Like actually genuinely happy? Daniel glanced at Elena, who was fielding Marcus's questions with patient humor. Yeah, I really am. Then I'm happy for you. Though I'm also slightly terrified because dating a billionaire CEO seems incredibly intimidating. She's just Elena when she's here, Daniel said. The billionaire CEO part only matters at work, which you're leaving. Which I'm leaving, Daniel confirmed. I've got a few promising leads, actually. Northside Hope wants to expand their financial literacy programming, and they've offered me a position developing curriculum and training other volunteers. The pay's about 60% of what I make now, but it's sustainable, and the work actually matters. That's amazing, Danny, truly. Marcus raised his beer in a toast. To new beginnings and accidentally successful matchmaking. They drank to that, and Daniel felt another piece of his carefully constructed life shift into a new configuration, one that felt more honest, more aligned with who he actually wanted to be. Jennifer was the second person they told, primarily because Elena needed her assistant's help managing the inevitable media attention once their relationship became public. Jennifer's reaction was pure satisfaction. I knew it, she said, not even trying to hide her smile. The way you were after that first dinner, the way you started actually leaving the office at reasonable hours, the mysterious weekend plans you wouldn't explain. I knew something had changed. You also set me up on that blind date without knowing he worked here, Elena pointed out. A happy accident. The best kind. Jennifer pulled out her tablet, already shifting into professional mode. Okay, here's what we need to consider for the public announcement. Media statement, internal company communication, social media strategy if you want one, and prepared responses to likely questions about power dynamics and company policy. They spent 2 hours working through scenarios and contingencies. Elena's natural strategic mind combining with Jennifer's practical expertise to construct an approach that was honest without being unnecessarily detailed. The statement they crafted was simple and direct. Elena Cross was in a relationship with Daniel Hart, who would be leaving Cross Global to pursue opportunities in the nonprofit sector. Their relationship began after a chance meeting and developed over several months. Both parties were committed to maintaining appropriate professional boundaries during Daniel's remaining time at the company. It's boring, Jennifer assessed when they'd finalized the language, which is perfect. Boring doesn't generate ongoing scandal. It just answers the basic questions and moves on. Boring is underrated, Elena agreed, especially when the alternative is tabloid speculation and gossip. Daniel submitted his resignation to Cross Global on a Friday afternoon in early December, giving the standard 2 weeks' notice and citing the opportunity to work full-time in financial education as his reason for leaving. Patricia Chen accepted his resignation with professional courtesy, and by Monday morning the news had spread through the department that Hart was leaving for some nonprofit position. Josh caught him at lunch. "Man, I can't believe you're actually leaving. Where are you going again?" "Northside Hope Community Center. I'll be developing financial literacy curriculum and managing their education programs." "That's a huge pay cut though, right?" "Significant, yeah. But the work matters more. And I'm at a point in my life where I can afford to prioritize meaning over maximum salary." "That's really admirable. Seriously. Most people just talk about doing meaningful work someday, but you're actually doing it." Daniel smiled, appreciating the support, even as he knew the full truth would emerge soon enough. Elena planned to release their statement the day after his official departure from Cross Global, timing it to minimize the perception that she'd influenced his decision or shown favoritism while he was still an employee. His last day at Cross Global fell on a Thursday, celebrated with the standard office farewell of sheet cake and awkward small talk. Daniel cleared out his desk, surrendered his badge one final time, and walked out of the building into cold December afternoon that felt like transition made physical. Elena texted him before he'd even reached his car. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I just gave up a stable 6-figure salary to teach teenagers about compound interest. You gave up a job that was slowly killing your soul to do work that actually aligns with your values. That's called growth, not recklessness. Tell that to my mortgage. Your mortgage will be fine. And if it's not, I happen to know a billionaire who's very fond of you and your daughter. I'm not dating you for your money." "I know. You're dating me for my sparkling personality and encyclopedic knowledge of dinosaur fossils." "Exactly. The money is just a bonus. Come over tonight? We're going public tomorrow, and I want to spend time together before the world decides to have opinions about our relationship. I'll be there as soon as I get Maya settled." The statement went live Friday morning, released simultaneously through Cross Global's corporate communications and Elena's personal social media. The response was immediate and predictably mixed. Business publications ran headlines about CEO relationships and corporate governance. Social media lit up with commentary ranging from supportive to cynical to outright hostile. Daniel's phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues, old friends, distant acquaintances who suddenly wanted to reconnect now that he was dating someone famous. He ignored most of it, focusing instead on his first official day at Northside Hope, where the work was chaotic and underfunded and deeply satisfying in ways corporate finance had never been. The teens in his first class were skeptical at first, another adult telling them how to manage money they didn't have, but Daniel's background and genuine understanding of predatory systems won them over incrementally. Elena called during his lunch break. "How's it going? Are you surviving the publicity circus?" "I turned off social media notifications, and I'm pretending the outside world doesn't exist. How about you?" "Board meeting this morning was interesting. Several members had questions about whether our relationship creates perception issues for the company. I informed them that perception issues were their problem to manage, not mine, and that my personal life would remain personal regardless of their concerns." "That must have gone over well." "About as well as you'd expect. But Daniel, here's the thing. I don't actually care if they're uncomfortable. I spent years letting other people's opinions dictate my choices, and I'm done with that. They can adjust to the reality that their CEO is in a relationship, or they can find a new CEO, their choice." The steel in her voice made Daniel smile. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." "Too late. You're permanently on my good side now. Much more dangerous position." That weekend, they had their first public date, dinner at a restaurant in the heart of downtown Chicago, no hiding or careful distance. Cameras flashed as they entered, photographers who'd apparently been tipped off about their plans. Elena handled it with practiced ease, smiling politely and keeping walking, her hand secure in Daniel's as they made their way inside. "Does that happen often?" Daniel asked once they were seated. "The paparazzi thing?" "More often now than it used to. Celebrity CEO culture is exhausting, but it comes with the territory. She studied him across the table. Is it too much? The attention, the publicity, the constant scrutiny? It's different than what I'm used to, Daniel admitted, but it's worth it to actually be able to go out with you like this, to not hide or pretend we're just accidentally at the same restaurant. Good, because I'm planning to take you to a charity gala next month, which will involve significantly more cameras and considerably less privacy. Is that your way of asking me to be your date? It's my way of informing you that you're my date, and you should probably invest in a decent suit, unless you want to borrow one from Marcus again. That suit was perfectly acceptable, thank you very much. It was borrowed and slightly too tight in the shoulders. You're dating a billionaire now. We can afford to get you properly fitted formal wear. I'm not dating you for suit upgrades. No, you're dating me for my sparkling personality and dinosaur knowledge. The suits are just a bonus. They dissolved into laughter, easy and comfortable in a way that suggested they'd successfully navigated the transition from secret to public. Around them, other diners pretended not to stare while definitely staring, and Daniel caught whispered commentary about the CEO and her new boyfriend, speculation about how they'd met and whether the relationship would last. Let them speculate, he thought. Let them have their opinions and judgments. None of it mattered compared to the reality of building something genuine with someone who actually understood him. The holidays arrived with the particular chaos that came from blending families and negotiating new traditions. Daniel brought Maya to Elena's loft for Christmas Eve, watching his daughter's delight at the elaborately decorated tree Elena had installed specifically for the occasion. They exchanged presents. Maya gave Elena a drawing of the three of them with a dinosaur. Elena gave Maya a beautiful illustrated encyclopedia of paleontology that immediately became her most treasured possession. And Daniel gave Elena a framed photograph he'd taken of her and Maya coloring together, both their faces concentrated and peaceful. "It's perfect," Elena said softly, studying the image. "When did you take this?" "That first night you met her. You were both so focused on staying inside the lines that you didn't notice me grabbing my phone." Daniel moved beside her, looking at the photograph over her shoulder. "I wanted to capture that moment, proof that this impossible thing we were building was actually real." Elena set down the frame carefully and kissed him, slow and sweet and full of promise. "Best present I've ever received. Better than $1 billion company? Infinitely better. Companies are just money and power. This is family." The word hung in the air between them, significant and slightly terrifying. Family. Not just a relationship or a dating situation, but the foundation of something more permanent, more committed, more terrifying in its implications. "Is that what we are?" Daniel asked quietly. "Family. I'd like us to be, if you would." Elena's expression was vulnerable in a way that probably only Daniel and Maya ever saw. "I know it's fast. I know there are complications, but I can't imagine my life without you and Maya in it anymore. You've become essential in a way I didn't think was possible." "Daddy, are you and Elena talking about mushy stuff?" Maya appeared from where she'd been examining her new books, her expression knowing. "Because you have that look." "What look?" Daniel asked. "The look people have before they say important things in movies, all serious and soft at the same time." Elena laughed, the tension breaking. "You're very observant, Maya." "I know, it's one of my best qualities." She climbed onto the couch between them, snuggling against Elena with the casual affection of a child who'd decided someone was safe. "Are we family now? Like official family?" Daniel and Elena exchanged glances over her head. "Would you like us to be?" Elena asked carefully. "Yes, because then we could do holidays together all the time, and you could come to my school events, and maybe eventually we could all live in the same house, so I don't have to pack bags when I want to see you." "Those are all excellent points," Daniel said, his heart doing complicated things in his chest. Though living together is a very big step that would require a lot of planning and discussion. "But someday," Maya pressed. "Maybe someday," Elena said, meeting Daniel's eyes with an expression that suggested someday might be closer than either of them had planned. The new year arrived with the weight of possibility and the lightness of hope. Daniel settled into his new position at Northside Hope, finding satisfaction in work that felt genuinely meaningful even when the budget was tight and the challenges overwhelming. Elena navigated board meetings and acquisition strategies with her usual precision, while also making space in her life for family dinners and Maya's school performances, and the small domestic moments that had been absent for so many years. They weren't perfect. There were arguments about boundaries and scheduling conflicts, and the ongoing navigation of blending two very different lives into something cohesive. But they were real, honest, committed to figuring it out together, rather than retreating to the safer loneliness they'd both known before. On a Friday evening in late February, Daniel picked up Maya from school and drove to Elena's loft for their now standard weekend dinner together. But when they arrived, he found the apartment transformed, candles everywhere, flowers on every surface, and Elena wearing a dress that suggested this was more than just casual family dinner. "What's all this?" Daniel asked, even as suspicion and hope warred in his chest. "Maya, why don't you go start on your homework in the other room for a few minutes?" Elena suggested. "I need to talk to your dad about something." Maya's eyes went wide with excitement. She clearly knew something was happening, but she obediently gathered her backpack and disappeared into Elena's home office, leaving them alone in the candlelit space. "Elena, what—" "Let me say this before I lose my nerve," she interrupted, and Daniel realized she was nervous, genuinely anxious in a way he'd never seen her before. "I've spent my entire adult life being careful, making strategic decisions, choosing safety over risk in every aspect of my life except business. And then you walked into that restaurant looking like the world's most reluctant blind date, and everything I thought I knew about what I wanted got completely upended." She took a breath, steadying herself. "You've shown me what it means to actually live instead of just existing. You've let me into your life and Maya's life, trusted me with things that matter, made space for me in ways I didn't know I needed. And I can't imagine going back to the person I was before, the lonely CEO who'd convinced herself that power was enough." Daniel's heart was hammering now, understanding beginning to dawn. "Elena, I'm not finished." She smiled, nervous and hopeful, and so beautiful it hurt. "I know this is fast. I know there are 1,000 reasons to wait, to be sensible, to take more time. But I'm tired of being sensible about things that matter. So I'm asking you, Daniel Hart, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, impossible and perfect, and exactly what Daniel hadn't known he was waiting for. In the other room, he could hear Maya's very obvious attempt to listen in, the rustle of her not actually doing homework sounds. "You're proposing to me," he said, still processing. "I'm proposing to you. And before you point out all the logical reasons this is too soon, I want you to know I don't care. I know what I want, and what I want is you and Maya and this family we're building. I want to stop calling it maybe someday and actually commit to forever." Daniel thought about the path that had brought them here, the blind date he'd tried to escape, the horrifying recognition at the restaurant, the careful navigation of secrets and complications. He thought about Maya coloring dinosaurs beside Elena, about late-night texts that had become lifelines, about the way Elena had stood by him during the investigation, even when it risked everything she'd built. He thought about the fact that for the first time in 3 years, he could imagine a future that included actual partnership, genuine love, someone who chose him and Maya not, despite the complications, but because the relationship was worth navigating them. "Yes," he said simply. "Absolutely yes." Elena's face transformed with joy and relief. "Really? You're not going to argue about timing or logistics or—" "Really? Though I reserve the right to also propose to you properly at some point, because I'm a little disappointed you beat me to it." "You were planning to propose?" "I've been thinking about it. Hadn't quite worked up the nerve yet, but apparently you're braver than I am." "Or more impatient." Elena closed the distance between them, her arms going around his neck. "Either way, you said yes." "I said yes," Daniel confirmed, and kissed her with all the feeling he'd been holding back, all the hope and love and terrifying commitment to building a life together. From the office, they heard Maya's delighted shriek. "Does this mean we're getting married? Can I be in the wedding? Can we have dinosaur decorations?" They broke apart laughing, and Elena called out, "Yes to all of the above. Come here and celebrate with us." Maya burst into the room and launched herself at both of them, creating a tangle of hugs and excited questions about wedding planning and whether they could really have dinosaur decorations and when they would all live together. Elena fielded her questions with patient humor while Daniel just held both of them, his daughter and his fiancée, and marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The blind date he'd tried to escape had become the beginning of everything that mattered. The woman who terrified him at that restaurant table had become his partner, his love, the person he wanted to build a future with. And somehow, despite all the complications and risks and very logical reasons it shouldn't have worked, they'd found their way to this moment, engaged, committed, planning a life together that would involve family dinners and dinosaur enthusiasts, and the beautiful messiness of actually choosing love over safety. 6 months later, on a perfect September evening, Daniel and Elena were married at the same restaurant where they'd had their first disastrous dinner. A toile had been transformed with flowers and candles, and yes, subtle dinosaur decorations that Maya had insisted were non-negotiable. The ceremony was small, just close friends and family, Marcus standing as best man and Jennifer as maid of honor, Maya in a flower girl dress she'd helped design. Daniel stood at the altar watching Elena walk toward him, and his mind flashed back to that first night when she'd appeared and his world had tilted sideways with horror and recognition. He'd been so certain it was a disaster, so convinced the only reasonable response was to endure one awkward meal and never think about it again. Instead, that disaster had become the best thing that had ever happened to him. Elena reached him, her hand finding his with the familiarity of months of touch and connection. "Ready for this?" she whispered. "Ready for everything," Daniel whispered back. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about choosing each other daily, about navigating complications together, about building a family that valued both security and possibility. When the officiant pronounced them married, the applause was genuine and joyful, Marcus whooping loudly enough to make Maya giggle. At the reception, Daniel found a moment alone with his new wife, stealing away to the same corner table where they'd sat during that first terrible, wonderful dinner. "We made it," Elena said, her head resting against his shoulder, "from blind date disaster to actual marriage." "You sound surprised." "I'm surprised we had the courage. Surprised we navigated all the complications without running away. Surprised that something that started so impossibly turned into something so real." "I'm not surprised," Daniel said. "Terrified occasionally, yes, but not surprised. You were always worth the risk." "So were you and Maya both." They sat there as the reception continued around them, the restaurant that had witnessed their beginning now celebrating their commitment. Through the windows, Chicago's lights sparkled against the September night, the city spreading out below them like a promise of everything still to come. Daniel thought about the man he'd been walking into this restaurant 6 months ago, lonely, closed off, convinced that safety was the same as happiness. That man would barely recognize the life he'd built now, the family he'd found, the love he'd chosen despite every logical reason to protect himself. But that was the thing about real love, real partnership, real family. It required courage that felt like recklessness, vulnerability that felt like danger, commitment that meant risking everything you'd carefully protected. And it was worth it, worth every complication, every risk, every terrifying moment of choosing possibility over safety. The blind date he'd tried to escape had become the love story of his life. The billionaire CEO had become his wife and Maya's mother, and the person who made every day better just by being in it. And the carefully controlled existence he'd built had transformed into something messier, richer, infinitely more alive. Daniel pulled Elena closer, pressed a kiss to her temple, and smiled at the beautiful impossibility of it all. Sometimes the worst things turned into the best things. Sometimes disasters became blessings. Sometimes the person who terrified you most became the one who finally felt like home. And sometimes, just sometimes, the blind date you tried to avoid became the beginning of forever.